So, hi to everybody. This is Mazzarino Global Politics. Today we will have a special session. So I will thank all the subscribers to this channel. First of all, after the suggestion of DPA, I will tell you why there is this name, Cardinal Mazzarino. It's not connected about anything religious. So Giulio Mazzarino was like the head of the government during Luigi XVI. I will show you later. It was like a famous politics that was Italian by birth, but after was in France, in Spain, in a lot of government. It's very popular for especially one book that it's about quotes about politics. And so this is the reason of the name of the channel. Today we will make a special speech with Alex HistoryLegends. We will continue on this format where there will be one speech special for any session. For any speech, we will have a rotation of a speaker. For today, we have Jan, New World Econ, Eric and the Tanks, we at DPA, and Alex HistoryLegends. At the end, I will post all the links of all the channels. You will find also in the description of the streams and the channel all the contributors. And so, after this small introduction, I will give the speech directly to Alex HistoryLegends for sharing his presentation. For all the people, we suggest to you to send any comments, any question that you want to do directly to Alex now during his speech. And after we will do the typical question and answer format that we found that was very appreciated from the people in the last speech. Let me give you immediately the word. 1 second. Okay, Alex, the speech is yours.
All right. Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Alex, also known as HistoryLegends. So today I'm presenting. I'm just gonna share my screen. Do you see what I'm sharing right now? Do you see the title?
Yes, we see everything. I just put it.
So you see who is winning the war in Ukraine?
No, it's like click. Okay. Yes. Now, yes.
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 Okay, and now?
No. Left it not in full screen.
Okay.
Okay, it's visible.
Okay, perfect. So I don't see your reactions, so I'm just gonna be presenting. Yeah, I'm just gonna be presenting directly. So if you have any questions, just keep them at the end. So yeah. All right, my presentation today will be about who is winning the war in Ukraine, because this is one of the biggest topics right now, and I wanted to connect it to the past presentation about borders and everything. So if we look at the media, apparently Russia is losing considerably in every front. And I saw a lot of people show maps like this. The 5th of March, the Russians had all this land, and now they're retreating from everywhere. All right. Is it that easy? We'll see. I think that the importance is to go back a bit in history to understand what's going on in Ukraine and why they're fighting in the bigger scope. So this was the border of Ukraine from 1991 of their independence to 2014. You see Crimea, but you also see Donetsk and Luhansk. All right. However, it's important to understand, and this is what most people in the media don't know, most people don't understand it, is that Ukraine was part of the USSR before, right? It might seem obvious for certain, but the question is, if Ukraine had the right to secede from the USSR, is Donbas allowed the same thing from Ukraine? That is a question. it's also important to notice that a lot of the people back in the days in the USSR, they could move freely from one region to another. That means that a Russian speaker could go to Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and it would still be the same country. And all of a sudden, a lot of people that moved in the territory of the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union became stuck in another country. So some people moved back to Russia, but a significant amount stayed behind. And now we move to 2014, where Ukraine lost 7% of control of its territory, namely part of Luhansk and Donetsk regions. And it's important to show that it's not all the region, but a smaller part. And Crimea. So these are strategic places. Sevastopol was already Russian, so it was a naval base. But Crimea as a whole was always more Russian than Ukrainian. And this is important. So there's a fighting. I'm not going to go too much in depth into how the fighting started, how the battles started. The important is that at the end of this conflict, the Russian separatists held on to this region. And that could have been the end of it. That could have been the end of the conflict. So the thing is that the conflict dragged on. And you see that a lot of people, a lot of soldiers died on both sides. These are estimates, could be more. I've read reports that Ukrainians often brought up less casualties than they actually had. For example, they would only bring up casualties from the armed forces of Ukraine, but not counting volunteer battalions, which made up the majority of forces. So we don't really know the real amount of casualties. Same thing for the separatists. We don't really know. We know only that there was quite some fighting. And in this case, another question is it a civil war? Can we talk about a civil war in Donbas? What is the cause also? Because clearly here, most fighters were Ukrainian. One side was Ukrainian Russian speakers, and the other were also Russian speakers in a way. So it's strange to me that nobody even questions the fact that this might be some sort of civil war and that families might be torn apart and that it's more than just an invasion of a country. This conflict, in my opinion, is also a continuation of these post-Soviet conflicts that have been continuously since the fall of the USSR. For example, the Tajikistan Civil War, the border clashes between Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. Then there had been clashes and battles between North and South Ossetia and in Abkhazia. Then, of course, you're well aware of all the battles in Chechnya, Dagestan, Ingushetia, and Nagorno-Karabakh between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Multiple times, there's always been conflict, and same thing with Transnistria. And we see that the biggest problem here is the one I brought up at the beginning, that the borders were not made for independent countries, which brings up the question of the legitimacy of borders. This was my question for the previous presenter, as to, yes, there's international law that countries have to respect their borders, but what about countries that just receive borders with different ethnic groups, like in Central Asia, in the Caucasus? It's not homogeneous countries. And in a lot of places, you have some Russian speakers that got left behind. Not always, but in a lot of cases, regions either wanted to be independent, or there was always either a conflict with the border or ethnic tensions. And the conflict in Donbas and in Ukraine should be considered a post-Soviet conflict in the same way as all these conflicts or wars. And this is the question: is this a civil war? When we know that from 2014 to 2022, about 8,000 to 10,000 people from Donetsk and Luhansk have been killed up to this moment now in July. They're Ukrainian. They're Ukrainian. Most people always talk about them as Russian separatists to detach them from Ukraine, but they're Ukrainian. They were born in Ukraine. They live near Ukrainians, and now they fight against people that could have been their neighbors. I don't know. Let me know after, when I'm done the presentation, what you think, if this is a good way to view the conflict as a civil war with a Russian intervention, perhaps. Could be similar to the civil war in Syria, where you have the intervention of foreign powers in a civil war. Because without Ukrainians fighting each other, I don't think there would have been much foreign intervention. This is what I think. But of course, this is just a thought. Now, we see that the region that the separatists are fighting for is quite small on the map. And many people might say, why? What is so important about this region? It's only a small dot. Thing is that, first of all, you see that in blue is the regions primarily populated by ethnic Russians. So you see that all the east and the south has more Russian speakers, let's say. But the important thing is that when you look at a density map of the country, you see that most big cities and factories, industries are also located in the same area. That means that control over the sector is crucial. This is one reason why we can think that Ukraine didn't want to let go of it, because it was a very rich, full of resource region for the country. If it left, you see that if Donbas was gone, the country has mostly fields. It's not as rich. So it's also normal that most of the fighting nowadays is taking place here. Of course, it's very small, but it's very densely populated, a lot of urban areas that make the fighting very slow. And of course, there is the question of legitimacy of border comes back, because Ukraine, as we said, was always part of Russia in one shape or another, Soviet Union. And the central government have added parts to the country throughout history. There's this map, you probably saw that Ukraine at first was this, and eventually the Russian Empire increased its reach, and the Soviet Union continued by giving them all the south, by giving them Crimea, by giving them the western part of the country. And you see, this is about what every map here says. I made sure to use different maps so we have different sources, but the important is to know that the country of Ukraine, as it is today, has been given a lot of territory by the Soviet Union. Of course, it didn't matter then because it was all one country. It's like if you increase the border of a state within a country or a region, people won't feel the difference too much. But nowadays, since the country is independent, it's creating a lot of problems. You have also Hungarians, Romanians, Moldavs, a bunch of people that are outside their normal boundaries. But let's go back to the war in Donbas. Oh, one thing. It's also important to know that on the top right map, you see that Ukraine also claims some land in Russia, and that's another discussion entirely. So we talk about Russian claims to the land of Ukraine, but Ukraine also has claim on the land of Russia, and that's a whole new discussion. But the war, let's say it started. Some say that it started because the Ukrainians wanted to invade Donbas, that the Ukrainians were preparing a full-on assault on Donbas. This is what I've read in a lot of Russian sources. Of course, I don't know if it's true or not. Certainly, that was the goal of Ukraine, to reconquer this land since the beginning in 2014. So it could make sense. However, I don't know if they had enough forces there in the region to actually conquer this Donbas region. But that was the excuse for the Russians to march in. So this is the map 3 days into the invasion. The Russians advanced super fast. I'm not going to go over every step of the war, but I have to talk about all this to know who's winning, because we'll look at the conditions of victory for each side. So at this point, the Russian invasions pushed a lot into the country of Ukraine. They were approaching on every axis. And one theory that I heard, which makes sense, is that this was a bullying campaign. That, of course, the Russians wanted to take over the land or something, but it was more of a all-out attack on every front and expect the Ukrainian army to collapse, and then bully the government in Kiev into signing what the Russians wanted. So it makes sense because that would explain why the Russians spread out their forces. It would explain why they stuck on roads and everything, because the Russians did not expect a long war. At least this is what I think. For them, it was go on the roads, like in friendly territory. The Ukrainians love Russia. Everything is going to be fine. And they didn't prepare for a battle to take over Kiev. However, what they thought was that they could enter the cities without much fighting. And like I said, bully the government into agreeing to the Russian demands. Now, what were the Russian demands? I guess that this special operation, the goal of this special operation was that the Ukrainian government signs off on a paper once and for all that Crimea and these two separatist regions are part of Russia. This is what I think. And looking at the Russian maneuvers, it would make sense. However, that did not work out as planned. Some people even mentioned that the Ukrainians might have known of the Russian plans of invasion before. So there's a lot of questions we can ask ourselves. But all what is important is that this special operation did not reach the goal of making the Kiev government submit to the Russian demands. This is what the Russians wanted, the official recognition of the separatist regions. And the thing is, they did not even want all of Donetsk and Luhansk, in my opinion. It was just that the separatists get their independence and everything will be solved. So it's very interesting to see that had the special operation succeeded, this would be the territorial loss of Ukraine initially. Of course, the Russians then had to fight their way through because the Ukrainian government did not surrender. And this is where the Russians, I think during the entire month of March, were stuck in some sort of paralysis, strategic paralysis. They did not know what to do because this was not planned, this huge battle. They did not know what to attack. And since their forces were spread out, they could not effectively hold on to much land apart from the roads. So they made a lot of progress in the south, but that's about it. So the Russians, for a month and a half, they were stuck until April came in with General Dvornikov, and he kind of rebuilt the Russian forces for Plan B, or maybe even Plan C, that is the actual long battle. But I don't think, again, that this was the plan number one of the special operation. In April, they decided to remove themselves, to withdraw from the north of Ukraine, and to concentrate the forces in the south. Now, Ukrainians, that was a huge win, seemingly, at least at first, for Ukraine. The Kiev was liberated, the siege was lifted, Chernihiv, Sumy, everywhere. The Ukrainians took over, and the Russians were withdrawing. Some people might even have been thinking that the Russians would just withdraw within a couple of days from all of Ukraine. However, in my opinion, there are three events that changed the course of the war, because the logical conclusion was for the Russians to withdraw. However, there are three events that change everything. First of all, the videos of Russian prisoners of wars shot. This came to as a shock. It happened mid-March, if I recall, perhaps a bit later. But until then, we saw a lot of videos of Russians surrendering to the Ukrainians. But after that video came out, it was nearly zero. Why? Simple. Russian soldiers don't have cameras, like they don't have their phones with them. But their officers probably came up and said, look, if you want to surrender, this is what's going to happen to you. So it kind of boosted the morale of Russian forces that were already not so happy to be in Ukraine. But when they saw this, they're like, holy shit, these guys are, at least these guys in the video. I'm not talking about everyone in Ukraine, of course, but these guys are definitely hating us. If we surrender, that might happen to us. So might as well fight. Then there's the Battle of Mariupol. So the fact that the Russians encircled the city and slowly grinded their way through one of the biggest cities in Donbas and eventually conquered it was a huge blow for Ukraine, because since then, the Ukraine government has always been losing one city after another. And the third blow was the Izium breakthrough, which, let's say, gave another boost of morale for the Russians as they crossed the river and they captured a position that should have never fallen into Russian hands. There's a river, there's a mountain, there's an urban area, there are forests. Everything favors the defender, but yet here you can see the Russians push through. Now, the big breakthrough eventually did not materialize in something bigger, but it did pose a constant threat at the rear of Ukrainian forces of the salient in Luhansk. What I find funny too is that how the media portrays this conflict over and over, and this is what might be confusing for a lot of people. They hear a lot of news. For example, here, Wikipedia, Russo-Ukrainian War. I took this screenshot yesterday to be as accurate as possible, and they didn't change it since the 28th of June. It's almost 3 weeks. They didn't change the situation map. It's weird. You might think that they're neutral, but since the Russians have been pushing, they simply have stopped reported any success. So I think that was pretty interesting. Now, this is the approximate territory that the Russians hold, according to our beloved British Defense Intelligence. And you see that the battle is focused in this little region, 50 kilometers by 50 kilometers. And I see a lot of military analysts, experts, they say, look, the Russians are so weak. They're fighting for a little square and they're having trouble. I mean, the problem with such analysis is that it's so simplistic that it doesn't make sense. You know, Ukraine is in a way similar to Canada, is that not every part of the country is densely populated or rich. There's a lot of it was just fields. For example, if the Americans were to capture only the places in the red circles, that would be enough to fully collapse Canada. You only have to take Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal. And on the map, it looks tiny. Look, oh, only these little places. Canada is huge. But this is where the population lives. This is where business is. And this is what matters. This is the heart of Canada, especially here, Toronto, Montreal at the bottom. Same thing for Ukraine. Donbas is a very important part. It's the heavily industrialized urban area. If Ukraine loses it, it's kind of, they have to retreat up to the Dnieper. Now, with this entire little background story that I pushed very quickly and the military situation over the past few months, let's look at the victory conditions of both sides. So there's some that I found online, but there are 4 victory scenarios that we can think for Ukraine. Number 1 would be that Ukraine actually manages to reconquer and liberate all of Donetsk and Luhansk, as well as Crimea. This would be a spectacular Ukraine victory, like highly unexpected, turn the tables. Number 2, that they call a decisive Ukraine victory as well, would be the same thing without Crimea. It's already more realistic. I don't even think that at this point, Ukraine wants Crimea, knowing that they're 100% pro-Russian. So at least reconquer Donbas. The other victory scenario would be day 1 borders. We go back to the 23rd of February, and this is it. We push back the separatists where they started. But I don't think this is likable scenario now. If the Ukrainians want to push into Donbas, they would just take all of it back. They wouldn't stop to where the separatists started. Now, here's another scenario, is a liberated LDPR. That means that Ukraine only loses Luhansk and Donetsk regions, so the entire Donbas, but managed to stop the Russians there. That means that they managed to inflict so many losses on the Russians. It takes so much time that the Russians just stop after they stop the war, that the Russians stop the war after the conquest of Donbas. We see that the Russians have the bulk of their army in Luhansk and Donetsk, which makes this task of liberating these regions even more difficult for Ukraine. So for that reason, I think the Ukrainians actually wanted to attempt to do some sort of scenario 4. And we can see it, the scenario 4 at the bottom right, with the attacks they launched left and right in the past few weeks. They attacked at Kherson, they attacked towards Melitopol, and they attacked in the Kharkiv region. Of course, there's a double objective with these counteroffensives. Number one, it was to divert as many Russian forces from Donbas as possible to other fronts, and thus give the Ukrainians in Donbas a break. However, that did not materialize as they expected. In Kharkiv, the Russians managed to withdraw from land they didn't care about. But in Kherson, they considered the land very important, and the counteroffensive did not materialize. Same thing in Zaporozhye Oblast here. But we see that the goal of the Ukrainians now was not to liberate Donbas, as just from the facts. I try to be as straight to the facts, but we see that I think there's no hope for them to reconquer Donbas at the moment. And that for them, step one would be at least to reconquer Kherson, Zaporozhye, and Kharkiv. These are the victory conditions at the moment for Ukraine. But again, we see that the front line barely changed. Even in Kharkiv, the Russians still have 30% of the region, and they won't retreat more than what they already have retreated. And they always counterattack every now and then. So from a strategic perspective, or at least an operational one, these counteroffensive failed to reconquer land, and they failed to divert the attention of the Russians from Donetsk and Luhansk. In the contrary, we can even think that these counteroffensives diverted Ukrainian forces from the main battlefield, which allowed the Russians to conquer land. So, can we speak of a Ukraine victory at the moment? It's very difficult. But can we speak of a Russian victory? Let's take a look at the different scenarios. Again, it's the same people that made the map that I found online, but I think it was an interesting solution. So online people speak about scenario A, where essentially the Russians take over half the country. Now, we see that this did not happen. All right, so move to B, the landlocked nation. That means the Russians sweep through the entire south of Ukraine and create a landlocked Ukraine by taking Mykolaiv and Odessa as well. All right. And then option C, a Novorossiya. That means that the Russians take Kherson, Zaporozhye, and all the Donbas. This is what they call a Pyrrhic Russian victory. All right. Now, if we look at the map C, it's very similar. If we look at the map C, it's essentially almost what the Russians want, but I think we should add Kharkiv region into that scenario, because I don't think that the Russians would abandon the entire Izium region, and I don't think they would leave Kharkiv so close to Belgorod. If they would probably take all of Kharkiv region as well. So I would modify this with including Kharkiv region. And you see, This would be their land grab. However, to complete this, they have to capture 3 major urban areas, and this is the complicated part. Right now, they're still fighting for Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, and they're not even close to these cities. Like, they still have to break through multiple lines of defense before even reaching the outskirts of these 2 cities. And then, once this is over, if it is over in some time in the future, then they could consider perhaps taking Zaporozhye and Kharkiv. And if in the future, perhaps Mykolaiv and Odessa. But we see that this objective in yellow is becoming further and further away right now. And I think it's less of a priority now. Now, we saw that in terms of land, the Russians are closer to achieving their objectives than the Ukrainians are. Yet, the media says, no, this doesn't matter because the Russians lost so many troops that the win is not even worth it. Okay. And this is basically what the media says. But what's interesting is that on May 29th, the New York Times said, yeah, 30,000 Russian soldiers were killed. And one day ago, it's basically the same number, like 50,000 killed or wounded. You see how even the media twists the numbers around. Oh, it started at 30,000 killed, and 2 months later, it's about the same thing. What happened? Did the media lie? Or did they realize they made a mistake or something like that? And the media, I think, is responsible for a lot of the misconceptions about what people say online about these wars, because people don't know better. They just trust the mainstream media and they come up with conclusions. But it's false. The worst is when you go in websites like that say, yeah, the Russians have lost 154,000 soldiers killed, wounded, or prisoner of war. 81% of what was intended for the invasion. Of course, I think this is a Ukrainian source. Not to say that it's bad that it's Ukrainian, it's just that it's highly biased. And the number of 38,000 killed is again there. It's been there since the beginning of the war. So I wonder what happened. Also, the wounded, how do they know how many wounded soldiers? Like, they just multiply this by 4 or something. They just guess. And 1,000 prisoners, when we know this is false. We know that Ukraine doesn't have 1,000 Russian prisoners. It's after the exchanges, we think it's about 300 now. So this could be 3-4 times higher than the actual number. And I don't know why they push such false data even to their comrades. Is that, yes, for the morale it's good, but you also want to have the realistic situation on the front line so you can assess the situation and actually win. If you boost these numbers, you think you're about to win anytime soon, and the war drags on. And who pays for that? It's the Ukrainians. The morale is slowly decreasing. Every time they're told, yes, the Russians are all dead, no way they will take any other Ukrainian city. And then they lose Severodonetsk, Lysychansk. They keep saying this. I don't know who benefits from these lies. I think also the reason why they do this, in all seriousness, is that it's not for the Ukrainians, it's more for the Americans, to reassure Americans and Western support to give them more weapons to Ukraine. If the West sees that Ukraine might be losing, they might stop sending weapons to a lost cause. This seems to me the most rational decision. But when we look at the Russian losses, officially, it's about 5,000 KIA. And if we use a 1-to-3 ratio, about 14,000 wounded. These are official Russian losses. But of course, these don't include soldiers from the separatist republics, Donetsk and Luhansk, and they don't include the guys from the Wagner PMC. So I made a quick estimate. I think Russian losses are about 8,000 to 9,000 killed. And with all the wounded, we're at 39,000 total casualties, which is significant already. It's high. but not as high as what people say. They think that it's 39,000 killed. And I think this is a huge confusion too in the media. Then when they hear losses, they immediately think of a death when that's not the case. And it might change the perspective of what's going on. So we saw at this point that in terms of land, the Russians have conquered the areas that interest them the most. And we saw that Ukraine, in the best case scenario, they're losing Kherson and Zaporozhye and Donbas. It's hard to say that Ukraine is winning at the moment. Same thing for in terms of losses. For sure, the Russians have lost a lot of troops, but is it that high for them to stop all combat operations? I mean, in a way, they did have an operational pause, and most of these soldiers are frontline men that are hard to replace. Same here. But at the end of the day, what are Ukraine losses? This is the entire discussion. So we estimate Ukraine forces at 800,000 with all the volunteers, conscripts, regular forces, reserve. And then we said in the last few weeks that 1,000 killed or wounded per day. So we know that in the past 2 months, that's at least 60,000 casualties. Of course, we don't know before in the war. If we just use this data, it's very dumb data. I agree. And if you have questions about it, I'll try to answer to the best of my capabilities. It's just really dumb data. But just to show that both sides approximately lost 15% of their combat capabilities. Now, Ukraine might have more losses. I remember reading reports from the war in Donbas from 2014, 2015, and Ukrainians often underestimated their own losses by 5 times. It's a lot. So I hope it's not true, but maybe the 1,000 killed per day is only half or a third of what's actually happening in terms of losses. And of course, these men can be replaced, but by what like the men that replace them, they're conscripts, they're not technicians that know how to use armored vehicles and all this. So the quality of the army might decrease over time. But the problem is that still Ukraine has a lot of men, and this impact for them is less than for the Russians. Like every loss for the Russian is harder to swallow than for the Ukrainians. That's why Ukrainians simply send conscript to the front line to fill their gaps, because they know the Russians are more casualty phobic. Now, the other thing that's important to know who's winning in the war is that for Ukraine, Western support is essential. It's their lifeline. They receive tanks, they receive artillery, they HIMARS. And the question is also, why couldn't the Russians stop all this material from reaching the front line? This is a question I asked DPA at one point, I think a couple of days ago, as to why they didn't blow up the bridges, for example, or some things like that. I think that the Russian failure to stop Western equipment from reaching the front line is one of their biggest defeats, because it is causing them trouble. Not as much as what Ukraine might admit, but it's definitely a pain. And they certainly did not expect this when they started the war, that Germany would send their self-propelled howitzers to Ukraine. So the question is, why couldn't they stop it? Is it because they don't want to bomb civilian installations? Yeah, maybe. But I also think there's an economic cost to it. For example, the cost of a caliber missile is $6 million, roughly. Now, when you launch such a missile on a railroad, it's going to explode the railroad. But in only a couple hours and for a couple $1,000s, Ukrainians can repair this railroad. So it's not financially efficient to use this $1 million tool to destroy something that's so cheap. Same thing for electric substations, the ones that control the railways. Yeah, they can blow one up, but the Ukrainians repair them immediately after. And I think that's the problem with the bridges too. How many missiles do you need to blow up the bridge? We see in Odessa that the Russians have to launch multiple missiles on this heavy concrete, reinforced concrete, and the structure still stands. Like they can blow some parts up, but so they would need perhaps 20, 50 caliber missiles to blow up one bridge over the Dnieper. Now imagine they have 10 to destroy. They can't. So that's one of their failures. And I think now what they're trying to do, the Russians, is that they're trying to break the trust between the West and Ukraine by buying off a lot of this equipment from corrupt Ukrainian commanders. They allegedly bought some French Caesars. Apparently, they also bought one of the HIMARS. Honestly, I haven't seen pictures of it. It's a rumor. But you see, maybe it's fake and they're just pushing these rumors to further break the trust between the West and Ukraine. This is the only way they could see that they stop sending them weapons, because it is a problem. At the end of the day, it is a problem. Now, to finish this presentation, I wanted to talk about the victory conditions, who's winning the war. I think at this point, the decisive battle will take place from now until the end of summer. So end of July, well, already at the end, but August, September, this is where we're going to see what's going on. If the Russians manage to break through these Ukrainian positions and take over Donbas, all of Donbas, relatively fast, then the West might rethink their position on whether or not to help Ukraine. Especially since winter is coming. And winter is coming with no gas in Europe. It's going to be very difficult for a lot of countries like Germany. It's going to be very expensive for the people. However, the thing is, the Russians are struggling at Siversk, Soledar, Bakhmut. They're struggling. And if they had an advantage in Luhansk, now they have to rebuild their entire momentum for the offensive. They took a break. It allowed Ukrainians to reinforce positions, but we'll see in the next few days what happens. If the Ukrainians manage to hold this line, even though it's very hard to defend, well, it's going to be bad for the Russians. Because if they can't retake all of Donetsk, what was the purpose of this entire offensive? And it's going to be hard. Like we saw on the map, it's very urbanized. And here are all the factories. Thanks to Wiyat for adding the factories on the map, because it's very important to see where Ukrainians can hold. And it's just self-evident. Bakhmut, Soledar, a lot of factories, easy to defend. This is it. A lot of these Soviet factories, Soviet bridges are so hard to destroy. Like, it's actually impossible to destroy with missiles. We saw it. Even the oil refinery at Kremenchuk, missile after missile, and it's still running. It's been 4 months. The Russians did not stop the flow of oil either. So the Russian attempt to stop the flow of supplies just with caliber missile strikes failed. So they need a win on the battlefield, because at this rate, Ukrainians can hold for a long time. You know, they can't. I think it's military summary that said it, but even if the rate of casualties of Ukrainians is 1,000 a day, killed or wounded, they can take it for another 4 or 5 months without flinching. But the Russians cannot take the same rate of casualties forever. And this is it. This region here, this urban region, is the goal for the Russians. If they manage to capture it, after that, it's fields. There's the Dnieper here, but Ukrainians won't be able to hold on very much to the positions. If they take Donbas, they could even consider taking Kharkiv. This is the big objective. So it all depends. If the Ukrainians manage to hold, it's going to be bad press for the Russians. If the Russians manage to push through, they might have let's say, a bigger word in peace negotiations, because there's no way, at least at the moment, that I see the Russians marching on Kiev. I don't think it's their objective, but unless the Ukraine government falls and is replaced by another in some way, it's going to be a tough fight. Now, to conclude, it's also because Ukraine was a highly militarized country since 2014. Like, it's not a regular country. People say, oh, Ukraine, a small country that was heavily militarized with a lot of reserves. In a way, Ukraine was better at fighting than most Western countries, like France, Britain, Germany, Italy. It was a solid military power. And the Russians saw it very quickly. So the Ukraine army is a strong army, and the Russians, it's normal that the Russians are struggling because it's tough. And the Russians also don't send all their army into the battle. So to conclude, when we look at what the Russians hold, if they want, if they capture Donbas by the end of summer, like all of Donbas, we can speak of a Russian victory, even a small one, but at least they'll have the territories that interest them. However, if they can't capture Donbas, it's going to be a problem. Donbas is the key win for the Russians at the moment. So that concludes my presentation. And yeah, so do you guys have any questions?
Okay, perfect. Thank Alex for the presentation. I have many questions for
Okay.
you. So
should I
let's-
remove the screen share? Yeah.
I already removed them, so
Okay.
no problem. Okay, I'm still in power. So let's start from the beginning. Okay. So about questions. Okay, let's see.
So why not I ask? I
or the panel. If there is any question from the panel or DPA, I'm preparing. I have like minimum 4 questions for you.
Yeah. So just now,
Okay.
Alex, you mentioned about the objective, at the start of the operation, where they may not even want the whole of Donbas. I don't think that is correct. I think the special military operation right at the beginning is to liberate the entire legal jurisdiction of the entire of Donetsk and Luhansk, which is why they have this special military operation where they fight outwards rather than they fight a defensive war. They actually fight an offensive war to go outwards. So I think that I thought is not correct. So which is also why they have to fight from different fronts to distract the Ukrainian forces away from the front line, because if not, they are not going to push back. But although I have to also say that I did not expect an invasion into Sumy and Chernihiv, nor from Crimea, because I also thought that it's going to be like a, like you say, you talk about civil war, right? So I thought that it's going to be they're going to be acting like as if what they did in Georgia. So where they only enter from the separatist states and fight outwards. So that was my prediction before, when they just started. I didn't expect them to actually invade directly. So that's why it kind of like confuses the entire civil war narrative, because it became an invasion rather than a civil war situation.
Yes, the only thing is that why would they rush to Kiev, specifically the capital, if it was only to take over Donbas? Like, militarily speaking, had they concentrated their forces in Donbas, it could have been very fast. But why rush towards the capital from a lot of angles? And they did send a lot of troops in the north too. If it was just a diversion, like many people claim, you don't send half your army in the diversion. You send maybe 15-20% to fix the enemy force, but not half. So I think that the goal was really some sort of coup, some really special military operations to bring the forces to the capital and have the government in Kiev sign and say, look, these regions are not part of Ukraine anymore. But this is what I think. And I think they change objectives along. I think this is also true.
I in one of my very first videos, I explored the idea that possibly the official Russian statement is what you just said, that the operation around Kiev was simply a diversion, right? So I explored that, and it obviously, like, it's beneficial for them to say that it was a diversion, but in reality, like, it kind of makes a little bit of sense when you consider what Russia's primary goals were from the beginning of the operation. A land bridge from Donbas to Crimea,
Hmm.
big primary goal. Capture of Mariupol, those were two stated goals before the war even started. They were, everyone knew it, the Russians knew it, the West knew it. Those were two of the biggest things. So if you look, and some people have said this, and just I'm not sure if I even believe it, but we're operating on the assumption that this is true. The Russians sent somewhere around 20,000 troops south of Belarus to the western side of the Dnieper to besiege Kiev, and then they sent about 20,000 troops from the area of Sumy, penetrating through, um, northern Ukraine to the eastern part of Kiev, right? And then they send a force to besiege Kharkov. So if you think about it intuitively, the most important things for Ukraine to defend? A, their capital, absolutely
Hmm.
can't let it fall. B, their second largest city, can't let it fall. C, the Dnieper, Mariupol. So, like, those are very important obstacles to defend. But what the Russians did, or what they managed to do, whether they did it intentionally or not, is they managed to tie up the bulk of Ukrainian forces near their capital and near their
Hmm.
second largest city, while they basically had their way with Ukraine in the south. I would suggest that the capture of Kherson and the capture of not one but three bridges over the Dnieper in the first 5 days of the war was a massive defensive failure on the part of Ukraine and a massive strategic victory on the part of the Russians. If you
But
look at how considerable of an obstacle the Dnieper is to cross, it's a huge failure to let the Russians gain a bridgehead on the Dnieper within the first week of the war.
but you see, this is what I thought too, and you're 100% right. But you see, you remember how the Kherson front or the Crimean front pushed out so fast out of, like, it blew up Ukraine positions. Some say that some Ukrainian commanders actually opened the gate to Russian forces in the south. Now, I think that the Russians expected this to happen everywhere. That they expected Ukrainian commanders, perhaps that they bribed or something, to actually open the gates, but it did not happen like they expected. They expected, for example, Chernihiv and Kharkiv to fall so fast, but it did not happen. I think the operation did not happen as they expected it.
Certainly, I certainly agree with that. I think the truth is probably more a blend of the two,
Yeah.
and a lot of people have pointed this out. You don't want to commit 40,000 troops to Kiev in such a dangerous operation with basically no purpose, right? So
Hmm.
probably there was some discussion among Russian, higher ups on, like, what they should do, and there was probably several different plans, and it was like, well, there's a chance that Ukraine will just fold, right?
Hmm.
So we can't start the war without at least exploring that
Yes.
opportunity. So
Yeah.
you have Spetsnaz dropping into Kiev. You have KGB dropping into Kiev. It seems like there might have been some attempt to either kill or capture Zelensky or members of Ukrainian parliament, uh, which would have been supported by, airborne troops moving into Hostomel and, like, places like that. It's very possible, or it seems um, almost certain that that was a plan in action. But a secondary, benefit to that plan is it puts so much pressure on Ukraine in order to, pull troops away from these other
Hmm.
areas of the front. In my opinion, it was, so successful that it managed to um, pull enough troops away to really stop the Ukrainians from absolutely defeating. Like, if you look at the maps, especially the roads that the Russian forces occupied from Sumy all the way to Kharkov, or not Kharkov, Sumy to Kiev, the ground that they controlled was literally just the roads. if Ukraine had the power, they could have won or taken the best opportunity that they had to win the war right there. They could have cut off Russian forces around Kyiv and completely destroyed them. But Russia managed to draw enough troops into these places like Kharkov, Kyiv, Chernigiv to prevent the Ukrainians from taking any kind of initiative. They were totally reactive to what the Russians were doing the whole time. And while there were some definite failures on the part of the Russians, I maintain the opinion that they have had the initiative through the entire war. Withdrawing from the north was definitely a smart move. After failing to capture any of these objectives, it was definitely, they were just bleeding troops. And Ukraine really lost an opportunity to deal a death blow to the Russians there by not cutting off and surrounding those forces.
I completely agree. One second. I completely agree. I just wanted to say that the Russian retreat from the north, I don't know how many countries would have been able to pull such a move from both a military and political perspective, to say, oh, we're going to move our forces to somewhere else and give up half the gains just like that. Not many countries would have.
Biden can, from Afghanistan.
Okay. Alex, only I will put the question. Now there is the first one from the public. I have like other 3 or 4, and then we will pass to the general question. So the first one is this one. During the first offensive, next to being a complete disaster, it might have had some fruitful long-term benefits. So we were talking about the question all the time. So if there was, because the Ukrainians did use up a lot of their materials in the first part. What is like your opinion about it?
I hope I read this question properly. I think that, I don't know if he means that if the Ukrainians had folded in the beginning. I don't know. Like, I don't really know what he means, but perhaps the Ukraine would have been in a better position now had they accepted some terms. I don't know. Like,
I think he means that they used up a lot of their military. They lost a lot of equipment and used up a lot of their capabilities, throwing back the initial Russian invasion.
Yeah, the thing also is that on the Ukraine side, we have barely any information about losses or anything. It's so opaque. So we can only guess, but they only started talking about losses 3 months into the conflict. So I actually don't know how many losses in the north they had. I don't know.
Yeah, this is like same user DP only to add it because it's the continuation of the question. It's the same thing.
Okay.
So you see, it's about I heard that the Belarusian military summary channel, but it's not Belarusian military summary, but it's only military summary. It is from Belarus, but it's our speaker. It will be a part of the stream in the beginning of August. But Ukraine loses 20,000 men each month, which is enormous. If the number is correct, we already talked about it, but if you want to...
again, 1,000 killed or wounded at least per day for 30 days. We're talking about 30,000. But again, like I said, I read a report from the Battle of Decisive in 2015. And the Ukraine government admitted to 400-500 casualties, when in reality it was more like 2,000-3,000. And they said, yeah, again, we don't count every unit in the tally. And I think the Russians do the same thing. They don't count all losses. I don't think they necessarily lie, but they lie by omission. I think that's how they do it. So, yeah. So I think it could be more than that.
Okay.
Yeah. I think what the numbers is a lot of the numbers are made up, or no. I don't even think the governments themselves, the Ministry of Defense, actually know the exact number, because reports can be fake, can be wrong. Sometimes troops get lost, and then they just have no contact with their troops that is outfield, and then they're like, okay, we have no contact with them for 1 week. MIA, or maybe they are killed. But then they reappear again, after 2 weeks. Let's say they got lost in the forest. It could be this kind of thing. So that's why I always advocate, don't put too much effort and thought into the losses number because you will get confused, and then you start arguments on Twitter and Facebook or whatever over this kind of pointless stuff. It's not worth it.
Okay, so next question for Alex. What is the total economic benefit from getting the Pyrrhic victory scenario, population, the factories, the service, etc.? About the C, the scenario C.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. If we look at the post-Soviet conflicts, obviously now there's two advantages of what they have is to create the land bridge. You mentioned it. You mentioned it before, the land bridge towards Mariupol and Donbas. But also, this is the regions that have the most Russian speakers. Zaporozhye and Kherson regions fell so fast because people were not so, like, they were not angry at the Russians necessarily. They were pro-Russian, let's say. And this is the regions that they have to hold for mostly population reasons. Of course, there are resources. Of course, there are factories, but it's not the main aspect, in my opinion. So I don't know what you guys think of that.
I think the economic benefits. We're just talking about Kherson, Zaporozhye, and the Donbas, right? Basically, I think the economic benefits are probably greater than what most people would assume them to be. I think obviously the greatest economic benefits would be in the capture of Odessa and Mykolaiv. Those would be the two key areas. But I mean, if the city of Zaporozhye itself, and then the Donbas arc with all the industry that's there. Not to mention, this is kind of an undercredited field, but Russians and Putin's government specifically have some pretty excellent economic stewardship. They tend to they're very skilled in balancing budgets. Like if you look at the Russian budget over the last couple years, it's very well balanced. They don't run the same kind of welfare state that most countries do. They basically don't pay for education or anything like that at all, which I think will change in the future. If they keep up with these budget surpluses, I think they'll move back into that. But I think the Russians will focus. I mean, they're certainly going to dump some money into rebuilding these areas. How much money they have available for that, I mean, who knows? It depends on if they keep selling gas to Europe or not. But I mean, I think there's going to be a lot more economic benefit than most people.
About the gas, Jan, and then I will give a word to Alex. I have some updates of today. So at the end of everything, I will, because there is some new agreements the last days. I think that the winter is coming, but also for who is selling gas. So we will talk later.
But if it was only from an economic perspective, this war, let's say 100% economic, why didn't they push directly to Odessa? Why would they even bother with Donbas? Like, think about it. They could fix Ukrainian forces in Donbas and just push their army directly towards Odessa and Mykolaiv, cut it in half. Like, if it was simply economic, this would have been the move.
Oh, I agree. I don't think it's simply economic. I think it's security is the main reason, and or security from an economic aspect. If you look at what Russia's overall strategic goals are, or their grand strategy of things, it's to plug some of these gateway regions that move into Eurasia. They want to push up onto geographic barriers that are easier to defend, like mountains, oceans, deserts, you name it. If they can push up into, say, the Bessarabian Gap and the Polish Gap, they actually lower their cost of defense significantly because it's less territory. If you look at the Russian western border right now, it's every bit of 3,000 kilometers, completely impossible to defend. Lots of money for that, lots of troops for that. But if they had the Soviet borders, if they control 600 kilometers of border in a Polish Gap and another 300 around Romania, then that's considerably less. That's almost 4 times less the cost for border security. So I mean, there's like that economic aspect to it there, but it's far more. This is far more about security, in my opinion, than it is economy at all.
Yeah, I agree that I don't think is the economic side of this war. In terms of the benefits, I don't think that is a very key consideration for Putin or his government, because it's mostly a national security issue for them, and it's a geopolitical issue because Russia has been holding back like for a long time. When they first move in Syria, when they get invited by the Syrian government, by Assad, to enter into the Syrian civil war, it was a shock to the West. They never not United States has never expected the Russians to step in, and they do, in their own assessment, they don't think that the Russian military is capable of deployment so far away from their borders. And when they actually did it, they immediately crushed the ISIS forces. Although the target was never the ISIS forces, the Russians went in. Their first target was the rebel forces. It's not the ISIS forces, because the rebels were the bigger threat to the Syrian government. So then during their operation, they started to strike the ISIS, the oil convoy. So in terms of in this Ukraine war, I don't think the sense for the invasion is actually for the economic benefit. The economic benefit will be very hard to come by if, for example, they can capture all the industrial areas, the gas and oil, but the Russians don't really need them. They already have all these things already. They are big enough. They don't really need this. This is like an additional. It's like, you're already earning $3,000. This is just another $250 extra income, and you may not even get to cash out this $250 for the next 10 years because the sanctions will be there, the geopolitical system. Nobody will actually want to approve of Russians using all these newly captured industrials to earn money. They will be like trying to put a lot of barriers. So I don't think the economic benefit will be so clear. It will be a very long time unless something stupid happened in Europe this coming winter, and then suddenly everything swapped and changed. Then we'll talk about it later.
Alex, before the next question, if anybody wants to make any specific question about weapons, tanks, or everything, Eric is specialized on this. So if you want to know anything about new weapons, everything that is on the field, Eric will answer for you. Please put the questions in the comments, and we will give it to him. So this is an interesting question, Alex. It's about let's say the situation of the Olympic Games. I heard that Xi Jinping has to put into wait with a special military operation in Ukraine until the Beijing Olympics were over. Is it maybe not just a proxy war between NATO and Russia, but between NATO and BRICS? If I can make up like an addition to this question, you have to remember that the previous operation, invasion, call whatever you want, that Russia made was after the Olympics in 2008. So it's historically something that it's repeating. So I don't think that it's connected to China, but if you technically the Olympic Games were not finished, because the Olympic Games were to finish after the Paralympic Games. So formally, Russia didn't start the special military operation at the end of the Olympics. As you remember, the Paralympics of Russia were not accepted for the beginning of the special Olympic, for special military operation. So Alex, if you want.
Yeah, I think I made a video on TikTok about it like a few days before the invasion. I just looked at when the Russians attacked or when they fought in Donbas. So I put the dates in Donbas in 2014, 2015. And then I looked also at the Olympic Games, and I looked at everything, and I said in the video at the end, I predict in the week of the 22nd of February, this is going to happen. Because I think they did wait for the end of the Olympic Games. I mean, saving face is very important in Asian cultures. And if the Russians wanted the support from China, the president of China probably told him, okay, you can do it, we'll support you, but don't launch your moment before I'm done mine. So of course there's the Paralympics, but it's less watched, let's say, than the regular event. So I did think they actually waited to launch their operation, because they could have attacked before. The soil was harder before. Actually invading that late into the year was a bad idea. They could have attacked before. but they didn't do it. Like attacking in January or early February when it's really cold, it's perfect for tanks to rush in. But they waited, and they did so not for military reasons, but for geopolitical reasons, because China is their backup.
Yeah, I agree. Although I do not agree that it's a proxy war between NATO and BRICS, because I don't think that will be true. Because from my point of geopolitical view, Russia on its own is a superpower, just like United States on its own is a superpower. China on its own is also some kind of superpower on its own, and it's like a three kingdoms kind of situation where there's a triangle. The Russians are not very trustful of the Chinese. To be honest, they are adversaries. If the Chinese themselves knows that the only country that can really hammer them is the Russians. It's not the Americans, because they know that the Americans, if you need to come, you need to go on amphibious landing. You need to control the sea, and like the Japanese have tried. It's not so simple in World War II. They tried to conquer China, and China is huge, but it's different from Russia. Russia has a much bigger population. They have history of able to roll tanks across huge territory. They are able to do it, which is why the Chinese and the Russians have this very uneasy friendship. But they have to talk to each other, because even collectively they are not as strong as the Americans. And that is the reality. Even though they are big powers on their own, the Americans themselves are way too much more powerful. So I think the to wait after the Olympics is over, I think that is likely to be true. But I do not think it's a Russian BRICS thing. But the Russians cannot wait anymore. I think they have probably received intel about certain moves within Ukraine, which is why they did not bother to wait for the Paralympics. They just rushed in, and then like the Chinese just like, what? they can't really do anything about it, because ultimately Putin is not answerable to China. In fact, China is actually a bit of like a little bit of a subordinate to Russia, little bit.
But I like what we had said about this relationship between Russia and China. Everybody thinks of them like big allies, but historically they were enemies, right? So they're allies by common enemy, I think.
Yeah, I believe in the late 60s or early 70s, before Nixon visited China, Russia actually threatened to nuke Beijing at one point. It was you can look it up. Just look up the Sino-Soviet split. They started off in like a really like loose alliance, but at some point, China obviously like outpopulates Russia by a massive amount. They have a much bigger army. Russia actually occupies lands that are that China has historic claims to, specifically the city of Vladivostok in the Russian Far East. That's all formerly Chinese territory, and Chinese nationalists like eventually are going to want it back, especially since there's only like 4 or 5 million Russians that live on the Russian side of the border, and there's over 200 million Chinese that live on the Chinese side of that border. At one point, Chinese were probably looking at it with hungry eyes or something, and Russia said, "Well, we're not going to fight you with tanks and troops and waves of infantry like that. We're just going to nuke Beijing. So don't even think about it." So the Chinese backed off, and that eventually led to Nixon paying a visit to China, getting them to switch sides over to the American global order, and the rest is history. Led to the collapse of the USSR.
But
So
quickly, looking, I think the war in Vietnam had a lot to do with it. So there was a shift in the Vietnamese Communist Party with the Chinese and the Russians, so the Soviets. So this is one thing. But one thing I noticed too is that the Americans, in their geopolitical strategy, they would have every interest to separate China and Russia. But now, with their actions, they did everything to push two countries that are supposed to be enemies. They put them side by side on the same side. So I think that's one.
I agree entirely. I think
Not the
that's
best.
a huge strategic mistake by the U.S. I mean, I've gotten into this, and just so you guys know, like in case I sound like pro-Russian on any of this information, I'm really not. I think I tried to at least overestimate the capabilities of Russia and overestimate their position, because that's historically that's what America has done with their adversaries, and I think that's probably a good thing to overreact to situations, because then you're more likely to win. That's how winners act. So you don't want to underestimate your enemies, which is what America has done here, and you don't want to make stupid mistakes. Like I think as far as Ukraine goes, the U.S. has absolutely no strategic interest in Ukraine. So I think, I mean, if anything, Germany's the country. Germany and Poland are the countries with the most strategic interests, and it seems like we're acting on behalf of them, which is going to bite us in the ass, especially when it comes to elections. I think elections in America are going to go very, very wrong.
I want to
We have to there is like a specific question after for Eric, so I can answer about HIMARS and we can continue. Only for the comments of the people, and I will pass a little bit the talk to Wyatt, to DPA, and then the question to Eric. If you want to make any other specific question, but it's also outside of the Ukraine, because I received some question about Syria, Iran, whatever, you can post it. Only put it if you want to prefer, like the speaker that want to answer, or the panel, only this. So Wyatt, if you want to.
Oh, I was wanting to talk about the relationship between China and Russia, or particularly Soviet Union. So I actually follow this Chinese channel. So he speaks in Chinese. So the channel is called Tengu Media. So but everything is translated in English. So he delved into Chinese history, but the unofficial one, the unedited, not the clean up by the Chinese government one. So he mentioned that the Soviet Union, the Soviets or the Russians, had always been the bigger brother to China. And so what happened was that even during before the Second World War, during the World War II time, the nationalists is actually backed by the Soviets. And then after that, the Soviets, the nationalists switched sides. They decided to take American help. And then the Soviets got pissed. Then they decided to support the communist side. And that's when the communists started to win the war, the Civil War, and took over China. And then since then the communist troops took over most of China. And then, but so according to this guy, the Soviet Union told them that you need to go into Xinjiang. You need to take over this Xinjiang side, and then you need to take Tibet, because they are using China as another buffer zone, and then to them this is their little brother, and then they are expecting this little brother to take care of all this territory where the Soviets do not want to go. They don't want to overextend themselves, so they tell the Chinese to take over this place, take care of them, which is why you have Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, all these different. China is just one of them. So that they invested so much into the communists, then they decided to tell them to take over Xinjiang area as well, take control of the Uyghurs, take over the Uyghurs, and then control them. But then over time, they start, the Chinese get stronger and stronger and start to have their own thoughts. Then they start to overthrow the Leninist taught the teachings, and they start to have their own Chinese version of the Leninist teaching. This is when they start to have this split, and so which is why during the Korean War they fought together, but then during the Vietnamese War they fought against each other, because they started off supporting the Vietnamese together, but since the Vietnam War they started to split, and then the Russians start to support the Vietnamese, and then the Chinese subverted their own teaching, and then they wanted to support the Cambodian, the Khmer, and then the Soviet, the Vietnamese, with the backing of the Soviets, they invaded, and then they had this war between the Chinese and the Vietnamese. So this was the background to all this, the history that was really not really spoke about in the Western side. And I got shocked. I got really very surprised when I actually was listening to all this thing. It was fascinating. Yeah, it's Tengu Media but it's all in Chinese. So
it's very interesting. Because this thing about the different type of communism that technically is called socialism with China's characteristics. by Deng Xiaoping. And if you check, if someone is curious about this relationship, there is a very interesting book with it's an extract of a Mitrokin archive that was a KGB, let's say, archivist that defected and give a lot of very old documents. It's very interesting that China was the most difficult country in the world for KGB to send agents, because it was very difficult to find Chinese that wanted to make counter-espionage inside the country, and they tried to use, for example, Kazakhs or Kyrgyz with Chinese roots, but they were living in Soviet Union. So, for example, they entered with the wrong type of cigarettes or asking things that in China were not present, and so they were easy to find. So, Eric, there is a question for you about the HIMARS. If
I'm
you
here.
want to answer.
Yeah, sure. So the HIMARS, which is an American MLS, it was sent from, I guess, the mid-June, I think. They send it to help Ukraine, but the fact that they are strictly in low numbers, it might have an effect on the morale of Ukrainian soldiers. Like, for example, they saw that the HIMARS are actually very nice in how do I say that? They are very precise. They can deliver fire or at like ammunition depot. Like these days, we saw a lot of ammunition depot, especially in Kherson region. But yeah, they are. How do I say that? They didn't have enough of them to like attack to attack. It's more like a defense for the moment.
I agree with that completely. I was actually very surprised to see the number of targets that the Ukrainians were able to hit within the last week or so with the HIMARS. I was more or less impressed with how precise they were, but I don't think they have enough of them to make any kind of major difference.
Yeah, like just yesterday there was like 2 ammunition depots near Kherson and Novakakova that was just blow up. Just yesterday.
Eric, this other question about any Russian compatible equipment to HIMARS.
Oh, I would say maybe the Huracan, maybe, but I don't know if there is actually an equivalent, a Russian equivalent to the HIMARS. I don't know enough in MLS. I would say more about tanks, but we all have our limits.
Okay, no problem. Like this other question is for the panel, but it's specifically about, let's say, weapons, about the difference between, let's say, technological difference between Russia and NATO. Let's say that we talk a lot about it. If I can say one fast thing, it's very interesting because Eric have to answer about it, but also the others, everybody. The interesting thing is about we have to check about the cost of the weapons that we have in the NATO arsenal and the Russian. Like, we can say that we have better technology, but it's much more expensive and much difficult to maintain. So if we see the Russian arsenal, not so tanks. Let's say it seems, for example, there was like this scam about people that were laughing about the use of the T-62 or sent on the battleground. But at the beginning, nobody understood why they were used, not to attack, but for another reason. And this is the same thing that is made by both propaganda media, that were using the information for change the public opinion. If you go directly on fact, we can see, for example, in my point of view, and Eric can confirm, the tanks of Germany during the Second World War were much better than the Soviets, but they didn't win because they were very difficult to maintain. If you have one piece that was broken, or you have to send it to Berlin or whatever, to directly to Germany, and the Soviet tanks were much easier to maintain on field. So it's difficult to compare the arsenal and the materials. So
to go with that, Stefano, there's a famous quote allegedly that Adolf Hitler said that towards the end of the war, he said, if you would have told me that at the beginning of the war that the Soviet Union could start off with 20,000 tanks, I would have said you were crazy. But that's how many tanks that the Germans managed to destroy of the Soviets, and then they still had tanks coming. So, like, I mean, there's and then Stalin once said, quantity has a quality of its own. It seems like the Russians understand that well. They manufacture cheap, disposable equipment intentionally. Their fighter jets, Su-34s, Su-30s, $30 million compared to F-16s, or I mean, F-16 is one of the cheaper ones of America, but like F-15 Strike Eagles, F-35s, $100 million, if Russia is shooting them down 1-to-1, which some of the MiG-29s and Su-30s have the capability of doing, then that's a win. I mean, 30 million to 100 million, that's a win.
But
if anybody is curious, and I will stop myself, check this place that it's called Patriot Park. It's in Odintsova, next to Moscow. It's pretty new, about 5 years. I visited this 5 years ago. It's very interesting. Eric, if you will go there, you will never exit. Not because they put you in prison, but because there is the biggest quantity of tanks that you can find about all the type of tanks, and there is still the biggest tanks ever produced in the world. That was German, and it was very, very interesting because the tanks was incredibly strong as power, but it was impossible to move. So there is pictures I can share with you after. So this is like the practical use of the weapon, and on paper and on field. Sometimes it's different. So.
Yeah.
Eric?
Yeah, I think in World War II, I think the French had better tanks than the Germans as well. So I think the Germans did mention about how good the French tank was, but they weren't used differently because the French spread it out across the defense line, whereas the Germans actually do the blitzkrieg. They gather all the tanks together and punch through. So despite the
but it's more complicated. Let's be honest. Like, the campaign of France is more complicated. Like, this is the myth. I'm just saying that it's weird how the Germans passed through at Sedan. I'm just saying it's weird, and it might be conspiracy, but I think someone opened them the door because no, in all seriousness, the French removed all the reserves. The guy defending the place removed all the reserves, and he's like, oh, breakthrough, and then he became Minister of War of Vichy. I'm like, this is weird. The guy that loses the battle becomes the head of state. Well, the reason I'm saying is that we often say, yeah, the French tanks, they were separated. This is a technical analysis, but sometimes it's more complicated. But for the tanks in Russia, I think Russian tanks are very good. But the problem of Soviet material now is corruption. Is that, let's say, if it was a Stalinist style World War II, these were well made because you can't mess around. But nowadays, a lot of people will take the money in their pocket. They're going to use cheaper material. And yes, it's good, but the biggest problem of the Russians would be corruption. Like, their biggest enemy would be themselves. Now, yeah, so this is the problem. We saw a lot of tanks have problems like that. But
sounds like Ukraine, right? Ukraine and Russia is the same.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same problem.
I always say that they are the same country. It's just that one have Putin, one do not have Putin. I think that's the only difference.
They're very similar.
Question technically for the panel, I will not have any knowledge about it, about hypersonic weapons and the official NATO defense about it.
Yeah, the hypersonic weapon is basically just a ICBM or a missile, cruise missile that's super fast, and there is technically on in the western side, there is totally no defenses for it. There's no surface to air missile that can shoot down hypersonic weapons, and if they can, I think it's by luck. So if otherwise, they have no means of stopping such weapon, and the danger of such weapon is it can be nuclear armed. So that's the biggest problem, because the world peace is dependent on power balance, and when you have and the nuclear balance is what that will keep us all safe from a world war. But now the Russians, because of decades of threats from the Americans, where they Putin, when early in his term, he realized that the West have no interest in being friends with Russia. They like to see Russia as a continuation of Soviet Union, and see them as adversary, which is why Putin, right early in his term, decided to do this revolution for the Russian military. So they basically revamped everything, and hypersonic weapon is one of the priorities, because they need to have something that can overcome the West, because conventionally they know they can't win the war. So they wanted a nuclear weapon that can they can really get the Western powers to open their eyes and start to talk, rather than doing what they are doing now. So of course, not sure how effective is the hypersonic weapon in terms of geopolitically, because now it looks like the Europeans are still not talking. They are still not treating Russia like a equal. They are still talking down to Putin and Russia. Despite that, the economic situation, everything is like starting to look really horrible now, and protests are everywhere. But yeah, there's no defense for hypersonic weapons. Oh, I think the latest news I just saw today was that the Americans successfully tested their hypersonic weapon. It flew 5 times the speed of sound. I think the Russians fastest one flies 30 times. I think I think it's the ICBM, but of course we are flying in the high atmosphere. There's lesser friction, so you can actually fly much faster. But this is what I know. Otherwise,
so to real quick describe the difference and why they can't be shot down. If I can use a bit of analogy here for a typical like ICBM, how it would be shot down like anti-missile systems, it's almost the equivalent of shooting skeet, except someone's shooting that skeet to you. There's a great deal of physics involved, and you're trying to shoot at this thing in the middle of the air when it's coming down. So you have to track the trajectory of this thing, except for it's on a massive scale. It's across the planet. So you're tracking it, and you're firing before it gets to a certain position in the atmosphere, hoping that your interceptor missile or whatever it is going to meet it up in that exact position. So there's a great deal of precision and math that goes into that, and it's not easy to shoot down ICBMs to begin with. The difference with a hypersonic weapon is most of them, and I'm not saying all of them because it's definitely possible, but most of them actually don't even enter the atmosphere. They can fly up, down, 100 feet off the ocean, zigzag back and forth, go up, down, side to side, over and over again. They can travel way further, way faster than anything else, and the path of them is completely unpredictable and random. So Wyatt's right. The only way to shoot one down is pure luck. You have to fire your interceptors almost before they even take off. You have to have, F-16s or F-15s, whatever the fastest fighter jet is, in whatever country's arsenal that's trying to intercept these things. You have to already have them out there close to the point of interception. And still, it's very questionable on whether like some of these like Sparrow missiles or whatever air-to-air missiles that these aircraft are armed with can even catch or intercept these things. Like it's totally a random chance.
yeah. So
That's all I have to say. Go back to
a
you,
good
Wyatt.
example how difficult it is will be like SR-71, the spy plane, when it flew over Soviet Union. The Soviet Unions have no means of shooting them down. Even when they have prepared fighters, they even developed the supersonic. I think it's the Foxbat, the MiG-31 that was meant to do interception. I think so. Yeah, I might be wrong. they also cannot catch. Every single missile that they fire at the SR-71 did not manage to reach. It's because the plane is just flying way so fast, and hypersonic weapon is flying even faster than that. So even talking about air-to-air interception is going to be really, really difficult. And I think the hypersonic weapon, something special about them is I think they can go around the world, and they don't really have to, they can pick their target later, if I'm not wrong. Like they can just go around the world. So that's why the Russians say that they can hit any locations anywhere around the world, which is like, then the Americans say that it cannot, it's not possible. That it's like a myth, until this war happened.
Okay, I had like a question for Yana. So it means no way US is supplying US fighter jets, right? They're too valuable to throw away, like in the Ukrainian conflict.
I really don't know. I would say as far as the F-16 goes, there is a literal shit ton of these things that have been manufactured. In terms of like manufacturing of military equipment, aircraft fighter jets is actually probably the biggest strength of the U.S. F-35s, there's going to be thousands of them. I don't know if it's going to be like 10,000 of them, but there will be thousands of them ordered by US and their allies and stuff. F-16s are almost a dime a dozen. That's like the equivalent to like the MiG-29. It's actually a little less in terms of maneuverability than the MiG-29. It's got more advanced avionics and stuff, but they're I want to say like $45 million or something, and the U.S. has probably close to 5,000 of them, or has manufactured close to 5,000 of them through the years. So, if the U.S. were to send 20 of them to Ukraine, it wouldn't hurt the United States in terms of our defense capabilities, but it would. It's questionable that they would eventually do it. There is rumors that the U.S. is allocating money for training of Ukrainian pilots on the F-16. I will say that if eventually American aviation equipment does end up in Ukraine, it's going to stop at the F-16. There's not a chance that F-15 Strike Eagles are going to a country where they can fall into like Russian hands. That aircraft, even though it's not as valuable as the F-35, is probably still considered way too valuable to give to Ukraine. F-35s, right out of the question. F-22s definitely never been exported to anybody. That's there's a moratorium on that from the U.S. Congress. That's what would you say? It's U.S. secrets. There's secret technology in that can't be exported.
Yeah, I agree as well. So the F-16s, they produce so much. I don't think giving even 50 of them would even cost the Americans anything. It's going to be mothball in the desert anyway. So it's just like, extra money. You can take something so old, like 30 years old, 40 years old, and then give it to the Ukrainians and charge them the full price. So I mean, it's good money. So it's not really a problem for the Americans monetarily. But
you mean they're charging the Americans full price, right? Because we're sending them all the money.
If Ukraine ceases to exist, then the Americans will have to pay for it, right? So,
yeah.
But F-16s are not that cheap nowadays. F-16 in the latest version, I think the Viper is actually more expensive than the F-35, if I'm not mistaken. So it's not exactly accurate that F-16 might actually be cheap. The newest one is actually very, very expensive. But the old ones are like worthless. They have so many in the desert. I think giving away is nothing. It's just like the Polish military giving away all their tanks, like in exchange for Abrams is I think is nothing for them.
White, you can check casually. Polish government have just closed an agreement with the U.S. Defense for
A new order.
F-35 yesterday.
F-35.
So magically, I think that could be move also not only tanks but also jets from Poland to Ukraine. But everything it's I think that all the materials that are ceded to Ukraine, for sure it's all on us. Let's say on the people who is giving, I think, of the counters, because Ukraine will not pay any debt about this war. It's technically it's like Sri Lanka the last time. If we don't give money, it's finished. So this question is very interesting, because we already talked about a possible COP. If you remember, we had the last time in Ukraine. About this situation about the last days, about purging hundreds of people, blah blah blah. Okay, Dino, if I can put something both sides. Remember that we are not biased. We are not pro-Ukraine, pro-Russia. We doesn't give a shit about these pro things. We make analysis on facts, and everybody have their point of view, but we are not biased. I can also put the question and the opposite part. Check how many purges were on the Russian side. It's the same thing. Check how many generals were changed during the beginning of the special military operation. So you can say the same, that it's possible to have a coup also in Russia. It's very, let's say, sensitive argument, because during the war there is a lot of things that change day by day. But to the panelists, if you have your own idea about what is happening about the circle of Zelensky, the stand is yours.
What?
Yeah. So okay. So lately they I think Zelensky sacked like one of them is a close friend. I think a childhood friend. At least according to the Russian pro-Russian media or the Telegram channel. I think the close. I'm not sure about the hundreds of people that he's purging. I mean, they have been using the SBU to capture anyone that's remotely pro-Russian. They have been like really abusing their secret police or secret service powers since the war started. So it's not exactly new, but I think the big ones are the ones that are close to him, the generals or the SBU heads of different locations. I think these are the ones, and I think the latest two that was really very close to him, I believe. This is my own speculation. I have no evidence, but it might be a case where they are advising Zelensky to negotiate or to surrender, or no, somewhere in between that two. Like maybe have a negotiated, maybe give up Donbas and that kind of thing to end the war. Maybe that's the reason. And Zelensky, he had thrown way too much of himself into this war that I think he cannot afford to just capitulate. Especially, he had been doing videos every day, cursing at Russia. So he's not in the position to have a negotiated surrender or negotiated settlement. So when the people close to him start to tell him that, maybe that's why he was sacked. I think the similar things happened to Hitler during the end days, where any general tell him to to negotiate or to retreat, they got sacked. So I think that is a very common thing, I guess. In terms of Putin side, in terms of Russian side, the purge, I think, is more to do with failures, like military failures. Like they start to realize certain guys are just not good at their job. They are just not good. They are good when it's peacetime, but in wartime they make very poor decisions, which is why they're changed. I suspect that might be the case. But of course, I do not know. No, these are all just my speculations. What about you guys?
Yeah, I agree. I agree with a lot of what you just said. I think as far as like purging of Russian officials goes, we haven't really heard any of that since like March, and honestly, I'm questioning the truth of it. Like, I mean, there was rumors that Shoigu had been sacked. There was rumors that like all kinds of people had been sacked. The head of Rosgvardia, which I think was actually the ones that ended up in trouble, and then the head of FSB ended up in some trouble. But outside of like the rumors of that, we like really haven't heard anything yet. Compared to Ukraine right now, I mean, this is like official statements. It's in the news, so we have confirmation of the firing of these people. Not to say that it's true one way or the other. That Russia isn't having its own internal problems with people like this. When it comes to like the possibility of a coup, I do think it's a higher chance for Zelensky than Putin, simply because the way I see the information on the ground is that Ukraine will eventually lose the war, which puts any leader, no matter whether it's Zelensky or no matter if like the current defense minister was actually the president, it doesn't matter who the leader is. You know, when you're leading your country down like a path of destruction, like one of the things that's going to be attempted to reverse that is a leadership change. I mean, you honestly, like I think a great comparable situation is look what just happened in Sri Lanka. The country's collapsing, leader gone. You know, first one gone. Look at Great Britain. I mean, you could sit back and claim all day that like you know, some stupid drinking scandal or you know, the sex scandals that weren't even done by Johnson, they're done by other people, are what brought down his government. I disagree entirely. I think that you know, the economy was in the toilet in Great Britain. The majority of the voting base that keeps the conservatives in power was shaky at best, and the conservatives took the opportunity to change leadership. You know, the country was going down the wrong path. Leaders got to go. Maybe that'll help. Like this is how most democratic countries, like or non-democratic countries, end up. You know, it's like a last ditch effort to like change direction, or you know, if anything, let's see if changing the leader helps. You know, so I think like Zelensky's under more threat for removal than Putin is, certainly. I mean, the rumors of Putin getting removed, I think are ridiculous. And even if he does get kicked out, it's not going to be for someone like Alexei Navalny, you know, or someone that's going to be like anti-war. I mean, the next Russian guy is going to be just as pro-war as the last Russian guy. I mean, this isn't. I don't see this how the Western media describes it as Putin's war. I see it as Russia's war, and Putin is just the president. He's just the guy pulling the trigger. And if it's not him, it'll be someone else.
That's the
and
thing.
imagine it's Kadyrov. Imagine Kadyrov take over.
Yeah.
But the thing quickly I want to say is that exactly like Putin alone cannot do anything. Like he has an entire structure with him. Like he's just a representative of this structure. But and also let's face it, he has some legitimacy and power. He's been there for 20 years. You can't just remove someone like that and expect things to go well. But Zelensky is different. What is his legitimacy in Ukraine compared to others? So for the coup, I think it is a fear that generals often take the spot of presidents when things go wrong. We go back to the example of France in 1940. This is exactly what happened. The military often takes power when the democratic government fails, especially in defeat. You know, oftentimes, even the Germans during World War I, it's the military that kind of took over when the government failed. So it could be that a general takes Zelensky's spot, but he most likely would sign a peace deal with Russia if he does so. So I think there's a conflicting view. Like, Wiyat, is he on this side or this side? And this side. But exactly, the like he said, I don't think that the Ukraine government can. There's two factions. Okay, that's what I want to say. There's two factions. There's the pro-war and the let's not do war anymore. And like I said in my presentation, the next battles in the next few weeks will determine the course of the war, because if there's no Ukraine win by the end of the summer, it's just going to go worse after that, like with the West support declining. So that's why I said the next few weeks are going to be very important.
So let's move to the next question. But it's very difficult question, but
no, I don't think so.
I will put you in this. Let's say I will put another to the question. Check about the Iraqi war. Let's say the Iraqi occupation about the US, but it was not a NATO war. We already talked about in the last speech. Who was the alliance, the official and unofficial alliance of the war? it's very strange because technically Iran participated in the US occupation of Iraq. And check if it was like with Saddam or with technically with the US. So it's everything. It's on the edge. And about another of this question, that it's about the selling of the drones. That could be an answer by Eric or anybody who wants about the visits of Russian officials in Iran, technically connected to the visit of Putin and the meeting with Erdogan and the Prime Minister of Iran in the factories of the Iranian drones. If it's possible that this contribution of drones can be such a kind of a war.
I read something about it, and there's two factors. Yes, there's the technical thing, but there's also the political thing to show that Russia is not alone and that they have an alliance with Iran and with many other countries. And I think it's a message too. Like, this is what I read, rumors that yes, there's this weapons thing, but it's also to show that Russia is not alone, that it's an alliance too. So this is important. And to answer the question, the Iran-Israel, it's been talked about for so long, but if it was really a thing, they would have done it a long time ago. But as time goes, it's always harder, and I don't think it's gonna happen.
I think Iran and Israel, it'll always forever be a low intensity thing. It's always going to be like a commando race kind of thing or proxy war kind of thing, because they are not next to each other. So that is one big problem on its own. So like for Israel to strike any place in Iran, they have to depend on agents. They need to depend on their fighter jets flying across multiple countries, needing their permission. Sometimes they don't ask for permission, but no, it's too risky. And the Iranians can do a lot of things to the Israelis. Should they be a declaration of war, even though they can't fight a ground war, the Iranians will be, they will have many ideas to how to cripple the Israeli economy, just by maybe blockading certain waterways. So I don't think Israel wants that as well. But these two countries just like bad brothers and sisters.
But there's also the thing with Hezbollah is that in Lebanon, well, when I went to Lebanon, everybody was talking about how Hezbollah defends Lebanon better than the actual army. And Hezbollah is actually at the border with Israel. And Hezbollah, they're Shias, just like Iran, and they're funded by Iran. So I think it's a proxy war. Like, the most that can happen, like we had said, it's a proxy war. And yeah, but also there was a thing I read a long time ago, so I don't know if it's good or not. It's that Israel is actually rethinking their alliance with the United States. Is that they see how in the ones that support Israel in the US are less inclined to support the country over the time, and that some people in Israel are considering shifting to an alliance with China. And that would flip the game because Iran is also with China. So in a way, that would solve the conflict. Like, they're both.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting situation because at face value, it seems like there's this utter hatred between Israel and Iran and the U.S. and Iran, and because of like this bad blood and this past, and I mean, I'm not suggesting what it should be, but the situation could easily flip into something different. For example, like if you're looking at the number of U.S. citizens that have been killed by citizens of a Middle Eastern country, the numbers of U.S. troops and citizens killed by Saudi Arabs is probably 10 times higher than that of U.S. troops killed by Iranians. And of course, most of the people in the 9/11 attacks were from Saudi Arabia and blah blah blah. Recent events like the murder or the strike on the general of the Iranian Quds or the guard forces. Can't remember his name. Things like that, and then Israeli assassinations of different nuclear scientists and stuff make it very difficult for those for the relationships to be resolved. But from a strategic standpoint, there's a pretty good argument to be made that if the U.S. wanted an ally in the Middle East in order to keep tabs and watch things, that Iran would actually serve as a much better ally and a much better base for U.S. activities than Saudi Arabia or Israel or even Iraq would. Just because of the unity of the country. Obviously they don't have nearly the problem with what would you say, like radical Islamists and stuff. Most of that's actually produced by the Saudi government intentionally. That's like a whole that's a whole other topic to get into. But yeah, long term, Iran is in a better position to control the Middle East than any of those other countries are. I think a conflict, especially a first strike, which is what seems to be the topic in the news right now, a first strike made by Israel or the U.S. on Iranian nuclear facilities would be a dramatic mistake. A war in this part of the world would be absolutely catastrophic. I mean, if you want to talk about the collapse of globalization, you're looking at like 40% of all energy flows through the Strait of Hormuz, and it's completely gone. There's not a ship captain in the world that's selling a tanker in there to pick up oil when there's missiles flying around back and forth. And you can guarantee that there's no way that the U.S. and Israel can deal any kind of immediate death blow to the Iranians to stop the straits from being shut down. Like there's just no possible way. I really hope that the statements that have been made in the last few days are just talk and they're not like under any serious consideration. Now, I mean, it would be best if Iran didn't have nuclear weapons, but I don't think they're as dumb as the U.S. suggests they are, or as propaganda would suggest they are, to where you get the feeling that what the media is saying is that if Iran developed a nuclear weapon, then they're going to use it immediately on Israel because they've made statements in the past like we're going to wipe Israel off the face of the earth and things like that. They wouldn't be so stupid. I think that most countries are run by like more intelligent, more competent people, and some of these crazier statements that they make are simply for domestic political purposes. I don't think that Iran would ever use a nuclear weapon if developed. And I'm skeptical on whether they even want to develop one or not. I think they're very comfortable with their position as it is right now, and being on the edge and being like, oh, we can make one if we want. Like, you guys better, sign a deal with us. I think it's a lot better place to be. They've been saying, or Iran's been saying they've been capable. They've had the capability to make an atomic bomb for 2 years now. They've been saying this. Like, why haven't they made one? They don't want to make one. So, I think Israel-Iran conflict, I'm not sure like how plausible it is, but I think it would be a dramatic mistake. I think a more likely conflict would actually be a war breaking out between Saudi Arabia and Iran. I think it'd be more likely, which would also be equally catastrophic.
Yeah. Didn't Seoul and Tokyo got bombed by North Korea already by a nuclear weapon?
Yeah.
Because remember North Korea, they always
Yeah.
think like North Korea get a nuclear weapon and they're gonna bomb Seoul and whatever. Yeah, but it didn't happen. Despite they supposedly have nuclear weapons, so I don't think that is true.
Yeah.
There is a question for Eric. Do you think Russia will deploy at least one T-14 Armata? Anybody of the panel can answer for testing, or at least T-90 SM Object 182. I'm completely ignorant about T-90 SM Object 182, but if you have any opinion about it, and then I will put an update about gas, and then we will pass through the last part of question, and we will close it.
Sure.
So Eric.
So the T-14 is like isn't even in service in the Russian army for the moment. If you check on Wikipedia, you can see that it didn't enter in service. So they only have like 20 of them, it might be, I think, a good opportunity. The war in Ukraine can be a good opportunity for testing the T-14 in combat conditions, so that they can upgrade it. For example, if it's vulnerable on any aspect. And
Eric, Eric,
yeah,
sorry, Yana went out, so say
okay, no
hi to
problem.
everybody because I had like some working stuff. So
Sure.
say hi to everybody.
And yeah, it might be a good idea to send like one or two of their T-14 to test them, just like they did, just like Soviet Union did with Spain Civil War, as well as the Germans. So that's
Okay.
it for me.
So if Alex or Wyatt, do you want to say something, or we will move to the next thing?
Yeah, I think this question was asked like maybe 1 or 2 streams ago as well. So
Yes,
I think
you
that
remember right.
I think they will just use some of the technologies to put it on some of the test T90s just to test the parts. I don't think it's wise to send in a T14 Armata there. I think it will attract way too much attention. I'm sure the HIMARS will be like feeling very excited to hit it. So I don't think so.
Okay, so I want to put like a small update to something that I found and I already shared also with Alex and with the group that could be interesting for you to understand that this war, call it whatever you want, special military operation, it's very deep and very far away from 2014 and not from 2022. There is an interesting book that I already invited like the writer of this book to the panel if he will come. I hope for the next weeks we will have a lot of surprises. So stay and return. If you check on this page, you can see about Shakhnazarov. It was like an aide of Gorbachev. It's about 1990, 1991. So it was on the edge of the collapse of the Soviet Union, and there was, let's say, Kravchuk, that was the secretary of the Communist Party of Ukraine, that was trying to catch the independence of Ukraine. I will read like literally. You can see that Shakhnazarov proposed that Gorbachev not only publish a repeat, but also lend an official tone to Russia's position with regard to Crimea, Donbas, and southern Ukraine. This is 1991. It's not 2014. It's interesting. He wrote, it should be stated plainly and clearly, without constraint, that those regions are historically part of Russia, and it does not intend to renounce them if Ukraine should wish to choose being part of the Union. So this is an important thing to understand, that in the Russian internal politics, it's
Sorry, when was this written?
It's 1991.
Wow.
So this is something to that it's interesting to understand. I was checking this thing. You can there is also some internal papers I will provide for the next stream, where Yeltsin and Kravchuk and the secretary of Communist Party of Belarus were trying to create the new Slavic Union without the Central Asians, social republics. And it was interesting because Yeltsin asked to Ukraine to join the new union, and Ukraine say no, we will not join. And also Yeltsin said that okay, but we need to remake the border of Donbas and Crimea. So it's 31 years ago, so it's something very old. A super update about gas, and then we will put the last panel of questions. So if you want put to the panelists, this is an update of today on some basic facts about, let's say that the 40% of GDP of Russia is based about, let's say, oil and gas revenue, mainly gas. Oil is not so relevant, but you can check by yourself. So Russia has the largest natural gas reserves in the world, blah, 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 and the total export, check on the number because it's very important, it's 238 billion cubic meters. So let's say 238 billion cubic meters. What is the import of Europe? And we will check about this. So it's about 155 cubic meters from Russia. So 238, 155 on this 238 go west. So 33.8% of the total amount of the gas export of Russia goes actually to Europe. So 74% of the 40% of the annual budget of Russia, it's from the export of gas to Europe. This is important to understand why winter could be difficult for both sides. So this war, it's complicated because it's not only Russia or Europe win, it's both sides that has problems. So let's check to this map. We see like the pipelines, we see where they are going, and the biggest capacity was the Yamal through Ukraine, that was 155. The biggest capacity was, let's say, repeat in Yamal. The biggest part of this 155 cubic meter. Then there is like Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 that was never operative. Now Nord Stream 1, it's down officially for maintenance. Let's see in 10 days if it was officially for maintenance. So you see that the total Ukrainian pipeline capacity, it's 140 cubic meters on the total import of 155. Why? So it was created a lot of other different pipes, because there was a lot of problems and lack of security on the pipes. You can check, there was a lot of robbery of gas into the territory of Ukraine. So it start 80, arrive 40. So somewhere this gas disappeared, but nothing disappeared. So alternative to Russian gas import, there was an error, so what alternatives Europe have? You can see US, but we don't have pipes to US. So only about GNL we will check. Qatar, it's very interesting, this part we will see later. Norway, Australia, Canada, Algeria, Nigeria. If you check in all these alternatives, there is no Russia allied. Check, 0. So you can see what is changing now. There is what could change technically. It's that the scenario of import of gas could switch in the next 2 years from east to south. Nobody's checking about this, but it's very, very important. Yesterday, there was the Italian government, and it was in Algeria. What is changing is that they're increasing a lot the capacity and the gas import from Algeria. Check where is coming, also from Africa. And the other part that could be very interesting is this pipe, the Trans-Anatolian Natural Gas Pipeline, that it's sending oil and gas from Baku to Turkey through Greece, Albania, and directly to Italy. Why I'm showing you this? Because there is also another option that is about Norway and UK. I'm showing to you that technically there is alternatives to Russian oil, expensive at the beginning, for sure. It will be 1 year, 1 year and a half more expensive. But what can have Russia for an alternative market of selling? Because remember, we are importing 74% of the, when I'm talking with like Europe, 74% of the total amount of gas it's imported in Europe. This is another alternative because Poland is pretty dependent also by Baltic states from Russia. So it's another pipe that it's connecting directly Norway to Poland. Another alternative is GNL. You can check about this natural gas liquefied. Italy and a lot of other governments just bought not only plants for liquefy the gas, but also boats. So you don't need stable places to use and import GNL. Why it's important? Because you can import a lot of GNL from Qatar, for example, because there is a huge quantity, and it's much more expensive to import from Qatar than from US. This is about the regasification offshore. So you can have these two things, or a boat. You don't need a regasification offshore, or this one. In Italy now, actually, we have free. Why I'm repeating about Italy? Because something is changing about geopolitics of import, and Italy could become the bridgehead of the import for the north. Before, the import was east-west. Now could be south-north. Alternative for Russia, let's check. There is only, let's say, one pipe to east. We already talked about it. It's called Power of Siberia 2. How much is the export to China now? It's about 16.5 billion cubic meters that could be extended in 2025 to 35. So the maximum capacity that could be made in export in 3 years is 35 cubic million meters. So importing of Europe, it's 155. Maximum import of China, technically in 3 years, it's 35 cubic meters. So 1/5. So what will happen in the future of the international gas market? Prices, stability, chaos. Technically, I don't know what to say about it, but let's say that it's something very interesting, that at this moment, it's much easier to make a deal than to continue this thing. So probably I saw the scenario that Alex put in the sea. I think that could be in the next weeks a lot of pressure about, let's say, some European leaders to Zelensky to maybe make an agreement. The problem of Zelensky, it's that you have a lot of right wings, let's say, supporters that don't like to see the territory to Russia. But technically, also Russia has a lot of things to lose, because if Russia will lose the European market of gas, I remember to you, it's 74% of 40% of all the GDP of a nation, but it's not replaceable to the Asian market.
That's why I sorry 2 seconds, but that's why it goes back to the thing that the battles in the next few weeks are going to be very important for Russia too, because they need a win, just like Ukraine, to convince the public opinion, because for both it's damaging this war.
And I think it's also depending on whether they can crush the governments in Europe this winter. So because the I think the European governments are making a huge gamble now. Because they are not ready for all these alternative pipelines, and there is not enough gas LNG ships around to transport what they need. So to build the ships, to build the storage for the gas, they don't have it now. So it's a gamble for the European leaders as well. If they can drag this war for 2-3 years and they can resolve the heating for the winter this year, next year will be better. The situation for Russia will be much worse. But if the European governments are not able to sustain this year and they got overthrown, all these resignations have been slowly appearing, then Russia might get that geopolitical victory as well, I think.
We have the actual data only for the people can understand it, that in my opinion, the real problem is Germany, because actually, for example, the two countries that has more dependence from Russia, it's Italy and Germany. Technically, it's strange to say to you, but we were the best friends of Russia before. It appears that we are in war, but if you check about the relationship between Russia and Italy, or Russia and Germany, it was incredibly good. commercially, everything. But we already talked about a lot. But Italy, for example, already achieved to have at least 67-70% of the storage already full. So we need to arrive to 90% before the winter, and then we can pass the winter without any big problems. It's only a price thing. But Germany didn't achieve yet. And so if you check to the Russian news, to the German news, you can see that they're already talking about containment or whatever. In Italy, nothing about it. They only say, left the climatization a little bit lower, blah, blah, but there is no restriction, nothing. Germany could be a big part in this deal. Why? Because, as I said many times, Russian can make lower the level of life, let's say buying less stuff or fancy things, but Germans are not Russians. So this is why, and the level of life in Germany, it's very high. So it's very difficult to, let's say, maintain the public consensus, asking, for example, a lot of sacrifices for Ukraine, not for Germany,
But
to the
Stefano,
Germans.
there's also, you talked about Algeria, but Algeria is a strong ally of Russia. So that's another thing to consider. Like, all their army is equipped by Russia, and Russia is basically their only ally in the region. So this is also interesting because I think they refused a deal with Spain. Spain wanted a deal with Algeria to get cheap gas, and Algeria said no. So I think there's also things to do with that.
It's Alex. It's only a thing about prices. You said right. They didn't make a deal for a cheap price. Now it's not about to give you gas or no. It's only about money. For example, now there is an increasing of the request of the gas market. You can check that the gas prices in Europe increased about 30 times from 1 year ago, not 2, 3, 30 times. So we were talking about prices that were about 20, 30 euro for cubic meters. Now it's I don't know. Nobody understand why. It's a lot of speculation about it, but Algeria, everybody is trying to checking all the money that can do it in this time. Also, Azerbaijan, it's a good friend of Russia. It's not an enemy. But Azerbaijan want to make money like in the market where they can sell oil and gas, but it's Europe. So it's.
But what if Russia sells gas to Azerbaijan and Algeria and they resell it? Could it be possible?
It could be possible, but technically, like the pipes from.
I don't know, I'm asking.
No, but the capacity of the pipes is already at the maximum, I think, with the new agreements. And so we are lacking the GNL. The GNL market is something different, but by pipes you cannot do it because there is no pipes to Africa from Russia, and technically the pipes that were from Azerbaijan were not in full use to north. If you could check them up, the actual pipes is going west, not north. The previous Soviet pipes were used because the main thing about the Azerbaijani oil and gas, it's like the Azerbaijani oil, it's very dense. So it's very good to mix with the Russian oil from the Urals to sell it because the Ural oil, it's low quality if you compare to Azerbaijani. If you make a mix, it's called Ural mix. And so this is why for the Soviets was very important to maintain a good government on Baku. If we will have in the next panels, I'm trying to have this speaker that is amazing. It's called Steve Levine. And he made a huge book that it's not new, but it's about the oil and the glory. It's very interesting why, in my opinion, the next focal point after Ukraine will be the Caspian Sea. You will see, like about all the things that is happening in Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, whatever. Why the Caspian Sea is considered a lake from the Russian and a sea from Azerbaijan. It's very interesting by the international law. why there is not a pipe that connects Turkmenistan to Azerbaijan, but only through Russia. So, but we will see in the next streams. Let's see if there is any other questions. So, okay. Questions. Okay. Let's put the last 2-3 questions and then we will close the panel. So what role do you think that Africa will play? Because it seems that many African nations are supporting Russia since the age of colonization, with SAR and the Soviets were the ones that supply them. Very difficult question.
Well, I think it's the same reason a bit why they support China. I think it's also because they don't like the European, so they're like, oh, we'll give the chance to the new guy because they have some trouble with European powers, and also European oil companies have access to a lot of it. But I think there's a difference between the people and the governments. The governments are in the middle, but the people they like Russia. Now, I don't think it would play such a big role. Maybe Wiyad has a different opinion. I know during the Cold War, it was more important, but nowadays Russia don't have so much influence in Africa, because back in the days, African elites would go to Russia and everything, but now it's not the case anymore. They prefer to go to China, actually.
I think Africa. Yeah, indeed, a difficult question, because I view it. I have to view it from how the Russians will have to view it. For example, to the Russians now is the new world order. The world is changing. The geopolitics is changing. U.S. Hegemony is weakening, and Russia is now plotting and preparing the world for this new multipolar world. This is how I look at it, which is why they are going to Iran. They are talking to Iran. They are trying to get Turkey to not take sides. They are preparing the world, like they are talking to Indonesia with India, and Indonesia and India is like on board. They are like, okay, we will not take sides, because they seem to be setting up this stage for a world that is very different from the Western led world. And I think Africa is very, they're very sharp, because they are always the one getting bullied, right? So they know that the world is starting to change. So you can see some of the words coming out from African leaders are a bit strong against the Westerners, against the West, Western Europe or Americans. The words are getting stronger as well from African leaders, like they are condemning all this hypocrisy that is happening. And I think Africa will have a chance to get wealthier in such a world, in a multipolar world, because in the past is the West say A is going to be A, say B is going to be B. No one can actually challenge it. But now it's like, oh, the West Americans don't want to buy, or you insist to buy at this price, we just sell it to the Indians, or we sell it to the Chinese. The world start to be a bit more fractured and more like a free market kind of situation, where the West is more harder to kind of pin things down. And I think the Russians are actually setting this stage for it. The Chinese has been trying to do this for a very, very long time, but no one trusts the Chinese. Everybody just want to take their money, take the benefits, but no one trusts them, because everybody can tell what the Chinese trying to do. They're basically just securing their own national security. They are signing deals that sometimes don't make sense for the countries, but they still sign them anyway, because it's good money for the person who is signing it. But the Russians are coming in with a totally different proposition, and with BRICS as the foundation to let the world into this new arrangement that is more fair or more vulnerable, depends on because more fair can mean more vulnerable. So I think this is how I see the world will change.
But I also think that the problem comes from how European leaders fail to understand Africa. For example, look at the French campaign in the Sahel or in Africa. The biggest problem is that French leaders, and not the only ones, but they fail to understand that that first of all, they're not as strong, but also they fail to understand the ethnic problems, the border problems of every country. And we see it again with Donbas. Is that we talked about it last time, the legitimacy of borders, but not everybody accept the borders as they are. And in Mali, the biggest problem, they've been fighting since independence. There's been fighting. One day they have a communist hat, one day they have an ISIS hat. They change hats all the time, the rebels. Tomorrow they can have a new hat. The problem is that the French failed to understand the geopolitical consequences of these countries. They give morals, but then they don't solve the problem. What the Russians and the Chinese also, they don't give morals. And the Russians, they have an advantage in Africa because a lot of African countries are dictatorships. And the Russians don't discuss this fact. They don't say, oh, you're not a democracy and everything. They accept the fact that this country is a dictatorship and they don't bully them because of that. And African leaders feel empowered that Chinese people and the Chinese government and the Russian government accept them as they are.
Yeah, I agree. Because if you look at how the Russians operate, they're actually different from the Chinese. So the Russians dealing with Myanmar military, it's pure business. No, you want to buy something, you got the money, okay, you trade. That's all. The Russians don't really care about that much. I think partly because they are very self-sufficient in a lot of things, which is why they don't feel the need to oppress, so-called oppress. Chinese is a bit different because Chinese have a lot of insecurities. They need to import a lot of things. A lot of resources are limited. Like for example, in Myanmar situation, there's a national interest for China to actually keep Myanmar under control. Because they need that. They are building. They wanted to build a pipeline of sort from Rakhine all the way up into China, because they don't want the ships to go around Singapore, because Singapore is not exactly considered a friendly country to them. We are a risk to them. So, and that route is full of US friendly countries. So if they can just go through Sri Lanka, which is a China friendly country, to refill and then go on to Myanmar and just pour in the oil, they can solve so much geopolitical headaches that they are having now. So China operates differently. So when they go to Africa, it's all about benefits and interests, profits, and national interest. So the Chinese sometimes come across as very to the Africans a bit how to put it,
Predatory.
It's like a new form of colonial mindset. Just that they give you a feeling that you still have control, whereas the old colonial powers don't give you control. They want to control everything. Russia don't really have that kind of situation. They just come in and they say, let's trade. What do you want? We can see what we can do, and then they just trade. So I think that is the difference, and that's why the Russians, when they come in to Africa and or to any other countries, they have some kind of authority where the Chinese don't really have, which is why the BRICS seems to be led by the Russians rather than the Chinese. That's the feeling I get, despite that China seems to be way more powerful in seemingly economically, but in terms of the leadership, it seems to be Russia is leading BRICS now rather than China. But that's my feeling.
Okay, let's put I already put the last 3 questions. So after this, we have the last 2 and we will close it. So this is an interesting question, but it's very technical. I'm very glad to have it because if we will be lucky, we will have a speech of Steve Levine, the author of the Oil and the Glory. It's very interesting, this question, because it's about the same pipe that I was talking about. There is 2 different pipes. One is called Bakushiyan. I will show to you fastly. So let me share to you directly. Okay, this is the map that I want to share to you. You can see that there is like the Baku, and it's going not through Armenia, but is the fastest way. But unfortunately, there is a huge war from 1991 about Nagorno-Karabakh. and so it passed through Georgia and then to Turkey. In the same war, the 2008 Georgian Russian war, there was a strange, I will show you the article, a strange bombing that you can see that it's like a Reuters article, August 29, 2008, that from the Western journalist, creators show Russia just missed Georgian pipeline. So you can check it by yourself if you're interested. What was the mismatch of this article? The mismatch is very simple. Russians didn't miss the pipeline. They miss it for purpose. I already said it in another stream. Why? Because this, if you can check on the map of this pipeline pass south of Tbilisi during the war in 2008, that for me was much successful for the Russian side than this special military operation, because they arrived 15 kilometers through the capital, and they were stopped only through a deal that was made at that time directly from Nicolas Sarkozy. This is the same analogy with Macron that was trying to make this agreement with Putin, and the real reason it's not about France instead of France. It's because France was the only components of NATO that stayed outside of NATO for 20 years. Not a lot of people knows about it, but check it. France was not ever every time in NATO, will stay out for 20 years. And if you are interested, there is another thing that we will check in the next stream. It's called troposcatter system. It was a radio system that was able to detect a nuclear attack from Soviet Union, starting from Turkey to Iceland and then Greenland and US, and was passing through France, from Italy, France, and going up. When NATO was losing, France had to remake all the network through Germany. So it's in this interesting relationship between Russia and France. It's based also about that France, it's one of the only country that it's a little bit more, not completely, let's say, dependent from US, because they win the war technically. Italy and Germany lose. So this is, so the real reason of the war was not the pipeline, but it was, let's say, a hint from the Russians to the Georgian, let's say, establishment. If the next time you will piss stuff off more, we can blow the pipeline very fast. So, question for the panel. Okay. Still Georgia. So we have a lot of questions about Georgia. With question, wasn't Georgia incident about Georgia intention to join NATO? Georgia was told by USA that join NATO. Okay. If the panel want to answer, then I will put the conclusion of the question. If somebody want to. DPA, niente. Nothing today about Georgia.
About Georgia? Which incident? Which Georgian incident?
It's 2008.
I wasn't very paying a lot of attention then, but I think the intention was because they were okay. So my understanding of what happened during those days, which was like, you know, Putin just became president, was that Soviet Union just collapsed not long. Russia is very weak. NATO quickly went on a massive expansion spree. They grew very quickly. They sort of almost secretly took over the Baltic states while Putin was busy, you know, consolidating power. He was in his first term, and then next on the line was actually Ukraine and Georgia, and Baltic states joining NATO is already a no-no for the Russian national interest. But you know, Putin was probably too busy, and he was still trying to make friends with the West, I guess, and he was consolidating power. He was very, very busy. So during his second term, that was when I think the Baltic states became NATO countries in the same month Putin won his re-election. and immediately he started the war that very year. I think just a few months later in Georgia, because Georgia and Ukraine was next. They were really close to becoming part of NATO. So, and Putin had no choice. The Russian military wasn't really ready to go to war. It was actually in a very bad state. So, but they just went ahead anyway, since Georgia is very weak, and they kind of like stopped this entire Ukraine and Georgia joining a NATO situation, which is why the whatever we are looking now in terms of the Ukrainian wanting to join NATO is a legacy from them, because they have been trying to get into NATO and they were really, really close. But because of the Georgian war, everything just stopped because NATO got frightened, because it's like, okay, we can win the Russians, but do we really want this war? Because ultimately Russia still have nuclear weapons. So this is how I understood the Georgian situation. Should Putin have lost the election, that means he did not manage to secure his power, did not consolidate his power within Russia, I think Georgia and Ukraine now is already a NATO countries. This is how I looked at it. So it was really, Putin making a judgment call, and he decided to go to war. I think similar to what we are looking now, where Putin made the decision that he have to invade into Ukraine, because what's going to come next will be much worse than what they are dealing with now. So this is how I look at it.
You can check that the situation is very similar to Ukraine, to all the viewers. If you check, the problem is still about the collapse of the Soviet Union, like this frozen conflict. Let's say that Ukraine was not a problem at the beginning, but I show to you that from the speech of aide of Gorbachev during the collapse, they were already talking about Donbas, Crimea, and the southern part of Ukraine. The same thing happened in 4 different places. Transnistria, it will be useful for the next month. South Ossetia, Abkhazia, and Nagorno-Karabakh. All these conflicts started technically during the 1991, because when there was a massive chaos, because all the republics were, not understanding themselves part of the union or not. We will see when we will talk about Central Asia. Check this thing. Azerbaijan made agreements with the export of the oil and gas to the West. I'm not talking to US, to the West instead to the North, during the process of independence. So it was still the Soviet Union technically, but Azerbaijan made agreements that, as a republic part of the Soviet Union. So it was a completely mess between 1990 and 1991. So all these frozen conflicts are like making this situation for 40 years. So Georgia and Russia and Ukraine were all 3 part of the Council of Europe, also Russia. There was for 5 or 10 years also such a kind of temptation for Russia to be a part of NATO. You can check it. But this thing, it's very complicated, because I'm trying to check, have some Russian speakers about it, about this thing that also we have to talk about the multipolarity world. That is a theory about Dugin, and it's very interesting about this thing. I don't know if China is completely agreeing with this multipolarity, because I think that they are more happier to be the best superpower in the world and not multipolarity. But let's see. The last 2 questions, and we will close because we are already 2 hours and a half. So there was this question. Okay. It seems that US is accepting the idea of a compromise with Russia, because they feel that too distracted in Ukraine while they should be focusing on the East Pacific. Do you agree, for the panel?
All right, it's funny. I mentioned it in my last video, but I think the US is increasingly shifting to the East Pacific, but for now, it's not the US that wants a compromise. I don't think it's the US. They're very happy with the situation, and they can keep the situation for long. I think it's the Europeans that want a settlement. It's not the US. I think it's the Europeans that want a settlement. And like we said, they can get gas elsewhere, but it's going to be more expensive. So if there's going to be a Judas in the crowd, it's going to be Germany.
I also don't think the US is thinking about compromise with Russia. They are earning a lot of money through this Ukrainian war. I mean, you giving away old stuff at a full price. Come on, man. I give away all my old stuff at full price. I will be so happy. So I don't think that's it. And also they get a lot of things in this Ukraine war. The Americans, they get NATO to become relevant again. NATO, they are the absolute leader. So, and then NATO arms with a lot of American stuff. So this is already a big win. And then they are selling stuff to Ukraine, so that's another big win. They are weakening Russia, be it economically or militarily, because ultimately militarily they are still losing stuff, losing men, so it's still kind of weakening. So they're happy with that. They are ejecting all the Soviet weapons away from the NATO alliance, so that's also a win. They are weakening the European Union and the Europe as a whole, which is also a win because European Union is a competitor to America economically. So they do not want EU to be a successful thing. And UK is right. Yeah, UK will be like, supporting all the way. That's why UK is so hard on about, the Ukraine war, because they know that this war is going to crush EU. And UK is like all in, because if EU fracture, UK will be the biggest winner, because UK wants, they want the EU project to fail because they themselves exited it. So if EU collapses or at least fractured into smaller pieces, then UK will have a much more, more advantage competitively in terms of economics or geopolitics. So the Americans also don't believe that China will go to war. But of course, they also did not really believe the Russians dare to go into war. They're just gambling. They're just trying and see whether Putin will take the bait, and Putin took the bait because Putin already put out the red lines, and they have no choice. Putin have to go in, but they do not believe the Chinese dare to go to war, which is why now we have a aircraft carrier sailing around the Spratly Islands now, just to ensure that the Chinese don't do something funny, because they can sense the Chinese are very itchy about doing something, because I think the internal problems are getting a bit too much for the Chinese. They're trying to get an escape out of through a war, but I think the Americans are making sure that they can't. The Europeans are distracted. It's not the Americans. The Americans are not really doing anything in Ukraine. Not much. They're just selling stuff, sending things over. And all the problems are in Europe. The Americans don't really have a problem except for oil price. So the Americans are pretty comfortable. This entire situation now is really advantageous for America. The problem is Biden screwed up his policies last year, because he shouldn't have cut the XL pipeline. If he had the XL pipeline, can you imagine how rich the Americans are going to be today? So he made a lot of poor policy choices, which is why the Americans are suffering. If not, they shouldn't have been suffering. They should have been earning a lot of money, because high oil price means that their shore oil can sell. So but they are now so not ready because of all these Green New Deals and stupid stuff.
We have a note for you, and then I have an affirmation that it's like from Calopea, and we will close on this one with opinion of everybody. So we will stay under the 3 hours. A note that because most of the people on the world don't know about Spratly Island, so only let's say people that are very interested. I think that if we ask the people that is watching this channel, few of them know it, but who knows about let's say Southeast Asia knows that it's very, very important and contented from Philippines, China, and Vietnam, and whatever. The reason, maybe we in your speech we can repositionate our speech in Southeast Asia, because we talk a lot about Ukraine, but you are on the side, so Spratly Island, it will be your work. So Last affirmation and a little opinion to close it. And then if anybody want to make comments for the next speech request, anything, put it in the comments in the stream, in the video on YouTube. So Calliope, this war is going to change the mindset of the Russian people. They will be forced to accept that Britain, Germany, France dominated Europe will never accept them as European. They will become more Asians. So if there is any opinion?
I mean, yeah, this is what a lot of people say, like this old thing about Russians being Asians. This is I don't know, I think it's getting old, but the western part of Russia is European, whether we like it or not. This is the world, the religion, everything is towards the west. Okay, now they're a bit towards the east for business reasons, but is it gonna last forever? I don't know.
Yeah, if you ever come to Asia, any Russians coming to Asia will straight away just say Caucasian, in whatever root slang that we have in the various different countries. So like even in Singapore, the it's not rude, but the local slang for Caucasian is actually in Hokkien, red hair. So basically it's the gingers. So you say Ang Mo is the Caucasian. So basically it just means red hair, means blonde hair actually. So if you say when the Russians come to Asia, the Asian, no matter which country you go, we just Europeans or Caucasians. Asia will never see Russia as part of Asia, even though that one huge chunk of that stupid country is actually in Asia, and that's confusing. So, but if you talk about they still have a lot of ethnic group. They are Asian looking, so we think that they are Asians. So I think they will forever be Eurasians. But I don't think it matters at all. I don't think it matters at all whether they are Europeans or not. It's just like the situation in USA. In USA they care about you're black or white or Hispanic or Chinese or yellow or Chinese. Although like when they think of Asian, it's always Chinese, but they forgot Indians are Chinese, are Asians as well. So and then they were like, so Indians are Indians, Asians are Chinese. So they are very confused. And then after that they have Filipinos and Vietnamese and all these different. But so only the Americans are really obsessed with ethnic. So we have a saying in Singapore, I'm a Singaporean Chinese. Singapore come first in the description. I'm Singapore first. The country come first. Singaporean Chinese. But in America it's different. It's Chinese American, Black American. There's always the race that come first. It's not the country that come first. So this is the difference in terms of the culture, where the Americans are too obsessed with race. And if you go and watch some of these YouTube channels there where they have the Americans coming to stay in Asia, they live in Japan, especially coming to Singapore, you can watch, especially the blacks. I think this channel is all purely the Black Americans. They say that for the first time, they felt American when they're in Singapore. Because for us, we said, oh, you're American. But in America, they don't feel they are American. They feel that they are a different subset of people. But then in Asia, especially in Singapore, it's like, oh, you're American. Be it you're black, Hispanic, white or whatever color. We just hear your accent, we already, oh, you're American. It's like, it's a different kind of mindset. So in Asia, no, we don't really care that much.
Okay, so this is a little bit add to the previous affirmation. We need to know, and we will close it. It's interesting if we are talking about people mindset or business. It's interesting because 75% of the Russian population lived in European Russia. So only 25% of Russian are technically Asians after the Urals. And a lot of them, it's still European, as we had said, it's like Caucasian. You have a small part that it's like Tuvani or, for example, Far East Asia. There is also Chinese in Russia. like Russian Chinese. About this fake thing about, I know a lot of things about Russia because I have a lot of connection. I visited where I stayed in Russia. I love Russians. I love Russia. Maybe my mindset is not completely connected to the Russian way of thinking because I'm a mixed, but I normally stayed in the last 5 years, at least 2 months a year there. So I know a lot of about their lifestyle, not only from the streams or whatever. These things about the myth of tolerance, it's like that Russian people are tolerant. It's a little bit stereotype. Go to Moscow, and if you see, for example, the typical Georgian dance, that for me it's amazing. It's called Lizginka. You can check it on YouTube. It's amazing dance. If a Russian normal guy saw some Georgian ethnical dancing on the streets, they're pissed off. Not everybody is liking that they're showing up in their ethnical, let's say, dancing. But it's amazing to see. Watch it on YouTube. Or, for example, in Italy, it's, let's say, there is a lot of immigration. In Italy, we have a lot, for example, from Africa because it's next to. And so there is some people that accept, some other people not accept, tolerance, not tolerance, but there is this presence. Here in Russia, they are very tolerant with black people because they don't have it. So it's very easy. If you see one black guy, it's like a fun thing, and you don't have 1 million. The same sensation that you could have in Southern Europe, in Russia, for example, it's for the Caucasian or also for the former Central Asia Soviet republics. If you go in low-level works, there is a lot of people from Southern and Southeast Russia because they are considered not at the same level. So it's but not from every Russian. It's a stereotype also, this one. But the truth, it's a mix of thinking. It's not everybody have their own point of view. So to say Russia is a tolerant, US is not tolerant, it depends by the people. That single person have a tolerance or not. Generally, I think that Russia is a very complicated country, very good to go, but as I said in all the streams, Russians are more similar to European people than Americans to European. It's something that it's different. For example, if I can mix Canadian are more similar to European than to Americans because we have a system that is similar. Healthcare system, such a kind, but let's say you have some similarities about NHL. But for example, the social welfare that you have in Canada, it's similar to UK or whatever.
But little parenthesis. The thing is that Canadians are Americans. Like they're Americans with a different flag. But even the French Canadians, they're American that speak French. That's the difference. Because if Canadians, if they have to think of where they would work, they would never go to Europe. They would always go to the United States. Their news they watch is American. The shows they watch is American. They only have a bit of British heritage, but it's going down. But they're American. If tomorrow there's a union between Canada and the US, nobody would feel it. I'm just saying this.
What I wanted to say is that the roots is different because you were like more, let's say, British friendly at the beginning than US. But if you see to the, let's say, literature, to the tradition or whatever, and you check, for example, Eastern Europe and Russia were not the same, but very similar. Maybe if we can discuss for hours, but for sure there is difference between a Russian and Ukrainian culture, but they are very, very similar. Borscht, that is the typical, for example, Russian dish, it's Ukrainian. It's not technically Russian. Because during Soviet Union, there was not so this difference. Nobody cares about it. It could be interesting. I'm trying to catch, and we will close it. If Eric wants to say something, and that before the end, you can say everything and without asking. In the next speeches, I will try to have some Russian speaker from Russia, because it's very interesting. Maybe not to talk directly about the war, because it's very difficult and problematic. It's not so free to speech moment now about this. It can have some, let's say, problems after the streams. But to talk about, for example, the actual level of living, what is happening, what is affecting about the sanction, because we need to understand that this situation, more it's get longer and more it's creating problems to a peaceful relationship that was before between the Russian people and the European people. And a hint about Germany that could change something, it's that Nord Stream 2, technically it's not under sanction, because went in bankruptcy technically before the sanction. So when this special military operation will be ended, or there will be a deal, Nord Stream 2 can be reactivated immediately because it was not sanctioned. So I think that it's a technicism that Germans made it properly, because they still, let's say, trying to catch a deal with Russians. So I think that let's see what will happen, but we are showing I think the most different type of thinking about this special moment in our lives. So I think that we hope at all that everything will return back to a peaceful moment soon, especially for the people that is having like a bad life and death and family destroyed both sides, because you have death both sides. And so let's see for the next stream. I remember to you to add to all the streamers that we have. Eric and Tex is on Instagram. All the links are down on this video. Alex HistoryLegends, that actually has a lot of subscribers, but subscribe to Alex. Wyatt, DPA, Defense Politics Asia, super amazing channel that it's not only about Ukraine, but he has a lot of reports. Also, last time we talked about Sri Lanka, he made an amazing report, but I read it, so go and see DPA. Yana, New World Econ. Yana, it's very specialized on geographic and demographic. So you see that we try to make a mix about everything. So let's see to the next stream, that will be soon. We will update you. So for any comments, requests, or anything that you want, for example, put on the comments. I found Alex because one of our subscribers, not before we had, it was one commenter that sent to us, and we had say that I already know you. But and so if you have some other guys or girls or whatever you want that you want in the next streams, just ask in the comments, and we will try to satisfy you in the next streams.
Yeah, so you guys must subscribe. Remember to subscribe to this channel, Cardinal Mazarin Geopolitics. Have to subscribe, and then on hit the bell button, because Stefano will actually put up the schedule ahead of time, so you will actually receive the information or the notification that, oh, there's a stream coming up. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks a lot for all the people that stayed as I'm collecting all the questions. So see you the next time. Ciao.
Salut.